Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Out of nowhere, the old man stirred among his tangle of tree roots, fixing Sansa with his dull red eyes. Thinking he was looking for Bran, she thought to try and bring him around from wherever he was. Summerhall, presumably. Before she could do that, Mira nudged her and drew her attention back to the Raven. He was still looking at her. "There's something I want to show you," he said, nodding to the place beside her brother. After exchanging a glance with Mira, she lay beside her brother and took hold of the same root he clung to. Immediately, she found herself being pulled backwards, out of her own skin and down the time barriers. Thinking he was taking her to Summerhall, she stifled a gasp as she opened her eyes and found herself face to face with her mother. Catelyn Tully dismissed her handmaids, just like she did at Winterfell, when she wanted a moment alone with her daughter. It made her heart ache to think she was invisible to her now. Around her shoulders, Catelyn wore the Tully wedding cloak, and a gown of ivory satin hung the length of her body. Every inch a beautiful bride, she withdrew an unopened letter from a drawer and hesitated before opening it. The wax seal bore the sigil of the Braavosi giant. Preparing to read what it said, Sansa moved to her mother's shoulder just as Kate changed her mind and touched the parchment to the flame of a nearby candle. The giant sigil stretched and elongated as the wax melted in the heat, before the unread letter was tossed into the open hearth. Sansa watched in dismay as it blackened to ashes and blew up the chimney. The old man's hand landed on her shoulder. Before she could resist being taken away, the vision faded and she swiftly found herself in the crypts below Winterfell. Terror seized her as a piercing shriek sounded from far below, and a monster came rampaging through the ancient passageways in a hail of dust and falling masonry. The Raven tugged her elbow sharply, as if pulling her out of its path, and the scene reformed before her very eyes. She was high on a hill, in a camp set up between tree stumps. Beric Dondarrion was there, with Thoros of Myr, and "Araya," she called out to her sister. Rosier turned her face, and for one heart-stopping second, she thought her sister could see her. But it was a little albino dwarf with white hair that hung to the ground, taking center stage. The old woman was talking low and urgently. "I saw a maid at a wedding with purple serpents in her hair, venom dripping from their fangs. Later I saw the same maid slay a savage giant in a castle made of snow." Before she could even take it in, she was whisked away yet again. This time, she was in a glade in the middle of some woods. She stood, looking all around her in confusion. It seemed she was alone, until gut-wrenching sobs drew her attention to a broad old oak tree. Cautiously, she approached and peered around the trunk. A young Pater Baelish gave her a jolt as he appeared, curled up on the ground and crying piteously with his face buried in his hands. She could scarce remember a time when he didn't have that supercilious smirk on his face. She had certainly never seen him crying before, and if the puffy eyes and flushed face were anything to go by, he'd been there for quite some time. Suddenly, he stopped and composed himself with a few deep and shuddering breaths. A sniff or two later and his expression hardened. His eyes narrowed, and he swiped his tears away. A second later, Pater got to his feet and dusted himself down, before striding away and out of sight. Sansa found herself lamenting the fact that the trees couldn't show her what people were thinking. "Now to Summerhall," said the Raven. "Your brothers are waiting." "But I—" Before the words left her lips, she was there. What she thought was an early morning mist was smoke that still rose from the ruins of the palace. The smell of it hung in the still air, acrid and biting. But through the burned-out doors she could see Jon sitting among the cooling ashes wrapped in Bran's cloak. Without a second thought, she hitched her skirts above her ankles and ran to join them. Jon rose to greet her, with a kiss, remembering to hold his cloak closed as he did so. The kiss left a sooty mark on her pale cheek, and he apologized hastily. By that time, however, she had spotted the dragon hatchling stretching its wings and attempting to fly. "Well, we did it," he said, gesturing to the creature. "We're not sure how, but we did it." 101 questions were buzzing through his mind. Something he remembered when he saw the Raven there with her. Brynden Rivers was standing some distance away, regarding the scene with something like approval. "Can I hold him? Is it a boy or a girl? Is he safe?" Sansa's voice was an excited babble as she knelt as close to the baby dragon as she dared. In a fit of daring, she stroked the dragon's neck with the tips of her fingers. Just the lightest brush that tickled its scales. It answered with a screech that made her laugh. The sight of her smiling made him smile. but he couldn't enjoy the moment for long and soon found himself walking over to Rivers. By now, the hot coals were burning his bare feet. "I need answers," he told the old man. "What happened last night? How did I not get burned to a crisp? Even thought my clothes did." For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't answer, but then thought better of it. "It seems you didn't intend to use blood magic, but you did," he answered. "You know the people at the feast were also using sorcery to hatch those eggs, don't you?" Jon nodded. "I heard it mentioned that sorcery was used. And was it the blood? I used Prince Rhaegar's blood. He is the prince that was promised, after all." "It was both," Rivers answered, "and a third element, which I am sure you will discover in due course. Your blood magic combined with their fire magic, creating this great reaction, not as impressive as Daenerys Targaryen, I must say. She did it with blood magic alone. In the meantime, Lord Commander, you need to go back." Despite the backhanded compliment, Jon felt his heart lift. "You mean back home to my time? I'm done now. I've finished. Maybe once I'm there, I'll be lucky enough to get dragon hatching advice from Daenerys Targaryen." "Wasn't there something else you wanted from this time?" Rivers asked, sounding like he already knew the answer. But Jon was clean out of patience. "Look, I can't hang around here. Getting to know my aunt and the Crown Prince has been an honor and a privilege, and I will even see to it that Rhaegar's name is cleared for her abduction and rape. But return to them, Jon Snow," Rivers cut in, abruptly, "and learn all you can, and do what you can. Only when you are ready will you return home again." He felt himself deflating, shrinking again. "Very well, but what about the dragon? I can't carry it around. It needs to be in Winterfell." "Leave it to me. I'll guide him to Winterfell in this time," Rivers answered. "You know who I am and what I can do with dragons, and I have the time. Now go and find out who you are." "But how?" he began. But the other man had already walked away, leaving him standing there in the cold and wet grass. Jon supposed living in a tree for almost a century, and manipulating time gave the raven powers he could never begin to fathom. He was still curious, though. After returning to bid farewell to Sansa and Bran and the dragon, he made his way to the nearby stream to wash. Only once he was clean would he make his way back. It was as he dipped in the cold water, sluicing the soot from his chest, that he noticed it. The livid stab wounds had faded to little more than pale pink scars that dotted his abdomen and crossed his breast. Lyanna was resting her head against his shoulder as they trundled through the countryside in the back of a carriage. Her face was turned toward the window, but not really seeing anything as they passed. It was all a slow blur, anyway. Rhaegar leaned down and kissed her head. "Let's just say your dragon did hatch," she said. "What would you name it?" Rosier shrugged. Amidst the clamor to hatch the thing, he'd barely given it any thought. It had seemed a distant prospect, and naming it before it was born felt like tempting fate. He didn't reply immediately, as he afforded himself some time to consider it. "Back in the old days, we named them after Valyrian gods," he stated, eventually. "But this one would be different. This one would be ours. I think I would name it Sonyar." Flushing with pleasure, she smiled. "What does it mean?" "Winter in Valyrian," he replied. "I think it quite apt." Clearly touched by his gesture, she leaned up to kiss him again, only to be violently jolted by the carriage, suddenly listing. He was hoping it was only a pothole in the road. But outside, his guards' voices all rose in anger and the horses reared up, braying loudly. Alarmed by the sudden commotion, Rhaegar flung open the passenger door to see what the fuss was about. "Ass, you appeared out of nowhere!" one man yelped. Another, well known to him now, made hasty apologies. I'm sorry, but please, let me pass. I must see the prince and princess." The guard burst out laughing. "You must be joking. Look at the state of you." "Please, you don't understand." Lyanna, composing herself quickly, frowned. "Jon?" "It is," Rhaegar confirmed. "He's damn near naked." "Not again," she sighed. Now Rhaegar was scowling. "Does he make a habit of public nudity?" Without waiting for an answer, he stuck his head out of the door again. "It's all right, let him through." Although she ignored the question, her exasperation gave way to relief. "Actually, not as bad as last time. He has a whole cloak. Even if it is ill-fitting, all he had was a loincloth, last time." She broke off there, leaving Rhaegar to his imagination, and called out to her peculiar friend. "Jon, where are your clothes? What have you been up to? I can't keep getting you new clothes if you're just going to lose them again." She sounded like a mother scolding an errant child. which made Rocker smile. Meanwhile, Jon hurtled himself into the back of the carriage and settled opposite them. Disapprovingly, Lyanna motioned for him to close his legs, which he did abruptly. "You made it to Winterfell and back swiftly," said Rhaegar, hoping to break the tension. "No more than 8 weeks." Still wide-eyed and thoroughly startled-looking, Jon nodded. "I took a ship, Tarushi, I think. They're always the fastest." "You're back in one piece, and that's what matters," said Lyanna. "And I didn't mean to scold you. I'm sure we can find some suitable clothes in the next town." Just then, he leaned forward and whispered something he could not hear into Lyanna's ear. Clearly surprised, she pulled back and looked him in the eye. "Seriously?" she asked. Jon smiled and nodded. "It's done," he assured her. Whatever it was, it made his new bride happy, and that deserved a reward. To those ends, Riker shrugged off his own coat. "Here," he said, handing it to Jon. "For services rendered and for decency's sake." Jon colored, thanking him as he gratefully put it on over the tatty old cloak. Luckily, it was a perfect fit. Back in the weirwood north of the wall, Sansa climbed groggily to her feet. Remembering what the old raven had shown her, she sought him out straight away. She had tried to piece together the fragments she had seen, but each image seemed like fragments from several different paintings. To her dismay, Brynden Rivers looked half dead again and submerged with the tree that surrounded him. "He's skin-changing into that dragon. He'll be gone a long time." Brandon's voice sounded from behind her. Sansa turned to him, frowning. "You mean he's inside the dragon's body and controlling it, like he was with Mormont's raven?" "Basically," replied Bran. "If it gets too much for him, I'll take over and guide it to Winterfell. But one of us needs to be there, in the castle, ready to take it down to the crypts. Although we're in the body, we still can't open doors or navigate obstacles like humans can." Sometimes her brother's powers worried her. She'd heard about him skin-changing into birds, his wolf and even Hodor. He was a warg, a skin-changer, a green seer, and now he was permanently hooked up to a maze of trees as old as time, able to explore anywhere at any time. It defied comprehension, but he made it look easy. As wondrous and complex as it was, she could see it had its downside. The downside was currently tangled in a nest of roots and completely lost to the current world. "Bran," she said, settling down beside him. "You're not going to end up like that old man up there, are you? I mean, it's all very intriguing, but you need to come home. You can't live forever in this tree." Bran's expression softened, his eyes almost sorrowful. "I will, but we need to get our home back. Then we need to fight the others. Winter is coming, Sansa, and we all need to play our part to defeat it. This is my part." "I understand that," she assured him. "But once your part is done, can't you come home with us?" "I'd rather a short life with my family and my home than an eternity locked in this tree watching over other people's." At that moment, Mira Reed appeared and greeted them both warmly. Sansa looked from her to Bran and back again. She knew there was a reason why Bran couldn't stay here forever, like that strange old man. She could see it, even if they couldn't. Only once he was on the ship to Dragonstone did Jon finally get a chance to think things through again. But the moment they hit the high sea and the vessel was rocked soothingly on the rolling waves, he found himself slipping into a deep sleep, dreamless and deep. He didn't stir again until he felt a soft hand rocking him by the shoulder. Bleary-eyed, he looked up into his aunt's regretful face. "Sorry to wake you," said Lyanna, "but we're disembarking now." "Already?" he gasped, struggling to get his wits together. "How long was I asleep for?" Lyanna laughed. "A full day." When she composed herself, she added, "I couldn't bring myself to disturb you. If I didn't do it now, though, the ship would have sailed off to Braavos with you still fast asleep on board. And then where would we be? Except Braavos, of course. You're no good to me in Braavos." He pulled on a clean shirt and breeches procured for him before they boarded the ship. Already all their belongings were being carried up to the castle. A foreboding fortress that looked like it was built into the vast gray rocks that surrounded it. Its walls were huge and thick, with sally ports at regular intervals. Behind those walls, he could see Dragonstone itself, topped with gargoyles not dissimilar to the ones at Winterfell. Prince Rhaegar himself escorted them inside, showing them to their chambers within. They passed through a drum keep where the sound of the sea was amplified and boomed all around them. Winterfell had one similar to, but so far inland they weren't kept up all night unless there was a particularly nasty storm raging outside. Thankfully, their rooms were set in the turret tower, away from the drum keep. They looked inland, to the mouth of the black water that led to the capital itself. That evening, they all dined together in the prince's chambers. A fish starter, followed by venison in a red wine sauce, with steamed vegetables. Not realizing how hungry he had been, Jon troughed a lot while Lyanna and Rhaegar chatted among themselves. But that evening, once Rhaegar had retired for the night, Lyanna came straight to his door. "So, how did it happen?" she asked, referring to the dragon egg. He told her everything, from meeting the ghost of Highheart to traveling to Summerhall, and the fire. There was no holding back on the truth now. It did no harm, and it made more sense. Insofar as blood and fire magic made sense to anyone who hadn't spent their entire lives studying the magical arts, Lyanna listened quietly, but attentively. She remained quiet even after he stopped speaking. "When you told me about Winterfell and all that's happened there in your time, the only reason I didn't give in to despair is because I know you'll do something," she said at length. "And now I really know you will. I worried in case the dragon would be too old. But Rhaegar said Balerion the Black Dread was 50 when flown into battle. So, who knows? Maybe ours will be just as huge as Balerion." Jon smiled. "Then the Boltons need to watch out." Lyanna cheered up, her expression brightening as she sat by the window and overlooked the black water. Night had fallen, and moonlight rippled on the dark waters, but still he could see small lantern lights from fishing boats bobbing around. Barely a few miles upriver was another of those places. Jon thought he would never see King's Landing. "I wrote to Robert," said Lyanna. "I never heard back, but then I never expected to." "What about Brandon?" he asked. Lyanna nodded. "Yes, but just to let him know where I am. If he needs me, he's to go to the Red Keep and ask for Rhaegar." "It's all right, Jon. You don't need to worry. That boy we saw with Lysa, he even let me use his raven." She grinned and added, "I gotta use the Targaryen seal for the first time. Given what I was told about you, don't you think they'll look at that seal and assume Rhaegar sent the letters pretending to be you?" he asked. "Or that you were coerced?" "Why would they?" she asked, giving a shrug. "All they need do is write, or come to the capital, and ask for me. Then we'll explain everything. I know it's not perfect, Jon, but under the circumstances..." Her explanation trailed off, leaving the rest to his imagination. But none of it added up. Unless the rape and abduction really was invented long after the event, used to justify a war against a long-established dynastic house. "I need to go to the Red Keep soon," he told her, thinking ahead to Brandon's arrival. By now, he ought to be on his way to wed Cad Tully. "There's someone I need to meet there." "Sure," she agreed. "Rhaegar's leaving in a few weeks, so why don't you go with him?" Relieved, Jon nodded. "That would be good." "Bring a spare set of clothes, though," she advised. "What?" "You know, for when you do your thing," she said. "You always seem to come back naked. Put the spare set somewhere safe, so you don't lose both at once. Rhys really won't be so understanding about it as Rhaegar and me." Jon couldn't help but laugh. "No, there's none of that going on. It's just me physically traveling to the capital and keeping my clothes on." Lyanna breathed a sigh of relief. "That's all right then." With that, she crossed the room to where a full-length mirror was fixed to the wall. Jon smiled at her as she fussed over her hair and gown, knowing she was getting ready to visit Rhaegar's bed. He got up to join her, hugging her gently. No matter what assurances he had, he still felt everything was destined to go belly up at any minute. After a second, he lifted his face to look at them both in the mirror, the two of them together. "Gods, Jon, you and I look alike," she said, laughing. "I never noticed until now, and I can see us both together." Jon had been thinking precisely the same thing. "I know I'm a Snow, but really we're both Starks to the last fiber." Bran was right. The three-eyed ravens steered their dragon all the way from the Dornish marches and up to Winterfell, arriving at the gates, already bigger and stronger. It had been fed along the way, clearly. Then they slipped unseen into the crypts, and the dragon had perched on Sansa's shoulder as they walked in side by side. It was strange going in there and not seeing Uncle Brandon and Aunt Lyanna's statues waiting for them. Even Lord Rickard hadn't made it yet. He was living above ground with his pregnant wife. Hardly anyone had mentioned Lady Lyanna Stark, but Sansa thought her pretty, and she made stony-faced Lord Rickard smile. By her own reckoning, that was Uncle Brandon in her belly, rather than their father. "Bran," said Sansa, as they went deeper and deeper underground. "I remember what you told me about what the Raven said to you, that would never walk again, but that you would fly. That's what he said, Bran confirmed. Although he walked in the past, as he was at that moment, he couldn't do it with his own body in his own time. Well, this is it, isn't it? She said, feeding a scrap of seared bacon, pilfered from the kitchens prior to entering the crypts, to the dragon. You will be the one flying this dragon. That's what he meant. You're the most powerful skin changer and green seer of all time, and you will fly. Breen stopped in the middle of a vault, turning to face her. Although the light was poor, all they had was a lantern lit by the flame of their dragon. She could see his eyes full of wonder. She heard him gulp before he answered. I don't think I'm ready to skin change a fully grown dragon. You can, Sansa insisted. You know you can. They continued in silence until they reached a spot where the path was blocked by fallen masonry. It was not so bad as they recalled it, so it was easily climbed over. Meanwhile, the dragon was still small enough to fly over it. Sansa heard him landing softly on the opposite side, then amid a burst of flame by which they could see where they were going. She thanked him, grinning as she did so and tossing him another scrap of bacon. He caught it in mid-air. While we're away from the others, she said, once they were safely past the masonry, there's something else I want to talk to you about. I think this is a more private matter between you and me and Jon. Oh, Bran replied. They reached another turnpike stair, leading deeper underground. What is it? I was at Aunt Lyanna's wedding to Rhaegar Targaryen, she began. It was all so very beautiful. She was so happy and perfect. They looked so in love. And him... She broke off, suppressing a sigh. Meanwhile, Bran laughed. It's so good to hear you talking like you used to, he said. Like when we were children, and you dreamed of your hero prince. Not quite, she corrected him. Bran, stop a minute. This is serious. I'm not just being a dreamer here. That silly girl is dead. Bran looked crestfallen as he stopped and faced her again. I'm sorry, Sansa. I didn't mean it as an insult. I know you didn't, she assured him, kissing his cheek. But think about it for a moment. Lyanna and Rhaegar were married. They were happy and in love. Robert rebelled, inventing this rape and abduction to justify his war. All Targaryens were slaughtered, even the babies. Lyanna dies, and father comes home with a motherless bastard. Bran, given what we now know, isn't there anything funny about that? All through that wedding, I thought how Lyanna looked like Jon. At first I saw Arya, but only Jon after that. Eyes, hair, nose, everything, and he's the exact same height and build as Rhaegar. He has Rhaegar's manners. All quiet and broody. Brienne took a backward step, putting some distance between them as his face crumpled. To her dismay, he seemed angry. Sansa, what are you saying? Our father would never do anything like that. He would never lie like that. Exasperated, she drew a breath to compose herself. But he did, Bran. Even Benjen told us. He lied about Rhaegar abducting Lyanna. No, he didn't invent the lie, but he let us all believe it nonetheless. Her exasperation gave way to sadness as she realized Bran was not angry with her. He was angry with their father, a man who had taken his secrets to the grave. Now he was looking at her, wide-eyed and uncertain, full of doubt. When he was only just recovering his old self, she began to feel terrible for sowing the seeds of doubt herself. But over the last few weeks, she had realized that they did know their father after all. He would not have lied unless he really had to. The honor that had condemned him would also have compelled him to save an innocent. Bran, she continued more gently. Father lied when he admitted to committing treason against Joffrey. He lied in front of the council, the queen, the king, and all the commoners, because he was worried that Arya and me would be in grave danger if he was executed. He could lie if the lives of others depended on it. He would have done the same for any of us, including his sister and Jon. Bran was still struggling, but eventually gathered himself. We don't know anything for certain, but I agree that we need to find out. So we will look into it, she asked, for certainly. Bran nodded. As soon as the dragon is safe, we'll get onto it. That was her priority and kept her suspicions about Bapliss to herself. Pitcher's day would come. Although the decor was different, and Targaryen banners still hung from the rafters, Sansa recognized the Red Keep's throne room instantly. Dragon skulls lined the chamber, half-shadowed in the cloisters, but it was still the Iron Throne which dominated the room. Behind the throne, the light from the oriel windows was poor and cast the new king in silhouette. She could see that Robert Baratheon had indeed been handsome in his youth. Her eye roved down the steps of the throne, and she sucked in a sharp breath as she caught sight of Cersei Lannister. The soon-to-be queen was gazing up at Robert, a hungry look in her bright green eyes. Beside her, Jaime was scowling and standing apart from his Kingsguard brothers, or what was left of them. Poor Sarah Barristan was still propped on crutches and wheezing through broken ribs sustained on the battlefield. Sansa linked her arm through Braine's, and together, they walked past them all, unseen and unheard. As she passed Cersei, Sansa could not help herself. She leaned in close and spoke in a low voice. "Whore, I helped kill your mad son." Cersei shivered as if she'd caught a sudden chill. Otherwise, she gave no indication of having heard or seen anything and turned to face the back of the room. Meanwhile, Rand was trying not to laugh. "I'd wager that felt good, sister." "It did, rather," she admitted, blushing all the same. As she did so, she tightened her grip on Bran's arm. "Look over there, it's father." Eddard Stark was right up at the front of the crowds, closest to the king. For so long now, Sansa had been unable to think of him without remembering that awful day on the steps of the Sept. Now here he was in front of her, as if brought back to life. To see him again made her heart beat race, even if he was wearing a look of cold fury. Lost in the vision of her long-dead father, she almost didn't hear the doors at the rear of the hall opening. When she did notice, she certainly did not welcome the arrival of Tywin Lannister. He was mounted on a finely caparisoned destrier, followed by attendants dressed in the Lannister colors. In their arms they bore large packages wrapped in scarlet cloaks of some sort. She remembered then, and a sickening weight settled in the pit of her belly. A sickening feeling that got worse with every step the Lannister procession took. For reassurance, she glanced up at her father. Although he could neither see nor hear her, his presence was enough to strengthen her resolve to see what she needed to see. His jaw was clenched, his lips a thin, white line, and his eyes dead and cold. His obvious fury made her tremble. As slight as the princess was, Elia's corpse had to be carried by two men. Blood-matted hair dangled from the open end of the cloak, and when dropped close to Cersei's feet, made a nauseating thumping noise. The baby, Aegon, was naught but a bloodied pulp of flesh, sinew and bone. He looked like offal tossed from a butcher's back door at closing time. Rhaenys, on the other hand, looked like Rhaenys, like a little girl who'd been skewered on a sword. She still looked human, and it hit Sansa square in the gut. Even Bran balked, but like her, could not tear his gaze away. They gripped each other's hands, so hard, Sansa, though the skin might be broken. Meanwhile, Tywin had dismounted and now bent the knee to his king, offering his tokens of fealty. As he did so, the hall was silent. Some turned away, but most looked as if they were in a trance and powerless to avert their gaze. Sansa steadied herself with deep breaths as the ordeal ended, and the crowds hurried away, but her father remained. Even after Cersei and her family had gone, Ned Stark stood unmoving and unflinching, his gaze tracking King Robert as he slowly made his way down from the throne. Even he couldn't bring himself to look upon the pulped corpses as he passed. "Was that necessary, your grace?" said Ned, finally approaching the king. For a moment, Sansa thought Robert was going to feign ignorance, or just ignore the question completely. He swiped a hand across his brow and sighed heavily. "It's war, Ned. It's what happens in war. People die, but children," Ned cut in, furiously. "The children could have been spared, sent into exile with their grandmother, anything but this. So in 10 years they can raise an army against me," Robert shot back. "Do you think me a complete lackwit, Stark? Compassion is not a weakness, Robert. Didn't Jon Arryn teach us that? Is that why we undertook this rebellion in the first place?" Lord Stark was implacable as he pushed his hand into Robert's chest, preventing him from walking away. "From what I've seen here today, you're already turning into the thing we fought against. What was the point if all you do is replace one tyranny for another? Tell me, Robert." "Careful, Ned," Robert growled. "Be fucking careful." If Sansa had been in her father's place, she would have run by now. But Lord Stark was not relenting. His hand was still against Robert's chest, his gaze not wavering from the king's. "This is not who you are, Robert. This is not what we planned. Now the slaughter of those babes will be stain on your reign, on your name, from this day until your last." "Babes," Robert cut in again, swinging a punch at his friend's jaw. Sansa flinched, as if she felt the pain of the blow herself. I see no babes. I see only dragon spawn. Cradling his busted lip, Ned straightened himself and looked at Robert as though he were a treasured pet. Suddenly turned savage, his breathing was ragged, the air rattling through him as he tried to compose himself. I will go to Storm's End and lift the siege, your grace. Then I will try to find my sister, whereupon she and I will return to Winterfell and never darken your halls again. You hear me? You will see neither of us again. While Eddard turned and strode from the room, Robert followed him cursing as he went. Sansa and Bran ran after them, paying no heed to the king's foul-tempered ravings. But all their father did was return to his own retinue, Lord Howe and Reed among them. They were both soon swallowed by the crowds in the outer galleries, and they could go no farther. When she tried to follow anyway, Bran stopped her. Sansa, there's no point, he stated. He's not going to Lyanna yet. He's going to Stannis instead. Dismayed that they'd witnessed all that and still not found out where their aunt was, she tried to think on what to do next. Then let us try Dragonstone, after the siege. Someone there must have told him where she was. Bran nodded. If you're right about Jon's parents, I thought I'd be angry with our father for lying to us. That was before I saw what happened here. You and I, both, she concurred, trying to suppress the memory of what she had just seen. Now let's go and feed the dragon. Hand in hand, Jon and Lyanna explored the castle. From inspecting the gargoyles on the battlements to the towers and stone drum, all the way down to the subterranean vaults. He had laughed as she kissed the statue of a stone manticore before racing for the chamber of the painted table. In there, he helped her climb into the seat that marked Dragonstone on the famous table, so she could see the realm as a whole laid out before her. Meanwhile, he pulled off his boots and trod carefully from Winterfell to the Riverlands, to the Eyrie and onto King's Landing, marking his journey, trying to estimate how far he had come. When they grew bored of that, they packed a picnic from the kitchens and headed below ground. The castle didn't have crypts, like those in Winterfell, but it did have a network of underground chambers and secret vaults. Some said the first Targaryen settlers had stashed hoards of treasure down there and sealed it in using magic. Not even Prince Rhaegar knew exactly what was down there, which only made Lyanna all the more determined to find out for herself. He said there might be Valyrian steel swords down here, she said, holding up a lantern to light their way down the turnpike stair. All it showed was damp stone and a twisted stairwell, and dragon eggs, and all sorts of keepsakes from old Valyria. You'd have thought Ruzier the Exile would have been so kind as to leave a map behind, Jon grumbled. They found none of it, but it did get hot. Very hot. Both of them were pushed back by the heat, compelling them to retrace their steps toward the open air. There's earth fires down there, he gasped, emerging into the open air. Why did they flee the doom only to set up home in a castle located over fires of the earth? Lyanna laughed before swooping down on a shining shard of glass. But it explains the abundance of dragon glass. Jon took the blade from her, balancing it carefully in his palm. Months ago, before the disaster at Winterfell, Stannis had mentioned it to him. Nor was the dead king exaggerating. The island was covered in the stuff, and he found himself gazing around at it all, wondering how it got from Dragonstone to the lands beyond the wall. Meanwhile, Lyanna approached the curtain walls again and wrapped one arm around a stone wyvern. She faced the brisk wind, looking out over the sea. "So what are you going to King's Landing for?" she asked, turning back. The wind changed direction, blowing her hair over her face. Jon shrugged. "Just some business I need to sort out." She wasn't buying it. "You're not from here, you don't know anyone, and you've never been here before. Look, you don't have to lie to me anymore." "I'm not lying," he retorted defensively. He dropped the dragon glass and lost interest in it, closing the gap between himself and his aunt. Irritably, she scraped her hair back from her face so he could see her again, but she did not look angry at all. "Tell me to mind my own business," she said. "But I was thinking it might because you heard something about your mother. Did you discover some information?" "You did say you were due to be conceived soon." It was a convenient cover, so Jon ran with it. "Something like that. But Ned's at the Eyrie unless he got your mother with child and then she came back here," she said. "Gods, it wasn't Ashara Dane, was it? They danced at the tourney, after all, and they spent time together. Ned gave her comfort after she had that spat with our Bran." He couldn't tell whether she was joking or not, but he knew she had a point, even if it was still too soon. Eddard wouldn't be much longer at the Eyrie. He knew. He and Robert ought to have left by now, ready to attend the wedding of Catelyn Tully and Brandon. Brandon, however, should be well on the road to King's Landing before they met. At least as he understood it. His father rarely talked about the war, and the exact timeline was muddled in his own mind. He could only hope to arrive at the Red Keep before his uncle. Whatever truth there is to be found, he stated, at length, I'll do what I can to bring it back. Lyanna raised a pained smile. I still have this unnerving feeling that there's a lot you're keeping from me. All the same, I wish you well. Thank you, he emphasized his point by kissing her cheek, a show of gratitude and affection for all she had done for him. Under the Raven's care, the dragon had grown already. It was up to Sansa's hip, and Bran had come to give it more food, helping it grow even more. A full boar carcass which she tied up on a stone ledge high above the bull pit they'd found to house it in. To get at the food, the dragon would have to exercise his wings and fly to it. It was something she enjoyed watching him do, even if it was all speeding by so fast. Down a passageway, at the opposite side of the bull pit, was the source of the hot springs. When she glanced over there, she could see the steam billowing out of the entrance and hear the churning waters boiling away inside. That was where Sonnier preferred to spend his time, but it was much too hot for her, or Bran, to go in there. As such, they hadn't even seen inside it. So, now we know Father didn't learn of Lyanna's whereabouts after the sack of King's Landing. What will we do if he didn't learn of it at Dragonstone either? She asked. Bran was watching Sonnier fly, the beating of his wings already causing a draft. Then we follow him. How can we follow him when he's at sea? She asked, eyebrow raised. Bran sighed deeply, keeping a watchful eye on the dragon all the while. That's what I don't know, unless we get on the boat with him, but there's something else I keep seeing. Something from that time, and that keeps coming up over and again. I see Father, with Lord Reed and a few others, arriving at a tower in the Dornish Mountains. I don't know where, exactly, and I don't know what, or who, is inside it. But at that stage, can you imagine it being anything else? Finally, he turned to her to gauge her reaction. Their father rarely left the north, never mind traveling all the way to Dorne. But she knew he had been there. I don't know, brother, she replied. But he killed Arthur Dayne, didn't he? Then took the sword back to Starfall. So your tower visions are probably just that. Lady Ashar might have been hiding in there. Really, who knows? Frustrated, Sansa once more, wishing her father had been more talkative about those days. She wished she had asked. But how could she have known how important it would one day be? She was torn between wanting to kick herself and wanting to kick her father. If the look on Bran's face was anything to go by, his feelings were much the same. So many secrets and so little time to uncover them all. It's not just that, Sansa, Bran added. Father fought against Sire Arthur and some others outside the tower. Sire Arthur didn't die at the Trident, and then Father returned the sword. Nor would he be guarding his sister. Ashera wasn't royalty. That threw a different light on the matter. Then we'll try there, after Dragonstone. We know Lyanna and Rickard are there, so maybe the staff know for sure. But she could see that something else was troubling her brother, and she urged him to go on. What about Pettier Baelish and the things the Raven showed you? Sansa hadn't forgotten that, but Jon had suddenly taken priority over him, and she knew Baxleash was still in Mole's town, waiting for her. I don't know what to make of them, she said, truthfully. He was there. He had a grudge against our uncle, and I know what Pettier is capable of. I know he sold you to the Boltons, but maybe he didn't know. He knew, she cut over him. She also knew it was time to stop protecting him, and he also killed our Aunt Lysa. I saw him throw her through the moon door at the Awry, and I never said anything because he saved my life. And there's more. It was Lysa, not Cersei, who murdered Lord Jon Arryn. She did because Pettier told her to. Breen sucked in a sharp breath, eyes widened in shock. Well then, start from the beginning and tell me everything. Sansa looked out over their impromptu dragon pit, where Sanya was still flapping about and tearing at the boar carcass. Just to be safe, she threw another down the steps to keep him occupied. Her explanation was going to take time. Jon, wake up! The prince's voice was urgent as he shook the other man from his sleep. He tried again, more forcefully, until he stirred and cursed quietly under his breath. We've got to go, said Rhaegar. Get dressed. The boat's waiting. Pushing back the bed covers, Jon shivered as a sudden chill engulfed him. Still, he rolled out of bed and apologized for cursing. But Rosier really didn't look bothered. He himself was disheveled and looked disorientated as he looked around the chamber, grabbing at Jon's things and placing them in a trunk. The longer he looked, the more concerned Jon became. "Your Grace, what's happened?" he asked, pulling on his breeches and boots. Although he already had his suspicions, Rosier's answer was terse. "We can't talk here." "Is it Brandon Stark?" The question was out of his mouth before he could stop it. Now Rosier froze suddenly, poised halfway to the door, his expression full of suspicion. It was enough to confirm Jon's fears, while not caring whether his foreknowledge would rouse the prince's suspicions. "How did you know that?" he asked flatly. Jon shrugged. "I just did. Now where's Lyanna?" "I've not told her." "Don't you think she has a right to know?" Jon retorted. "Her presence might help." "And what if it doesn't?" the prince snapped back. "Jon, there's no time to argue. Are you coming with me or not?" Within the hour, he had boarded the prince's private boat with no further arguments. It was the early hours of the morning, still pitch dark but for the crescent moon above. By the time they reached the capital, the ravens would be on the wing, carrying news of his uncle's arrest all over the realm. Meanwhile, all he could do was pace the length of the ship deck, looking out over the darkened seas in frustrated boredom. Even Rhaegar was sunk deep in conversation with his Kingsguard. Sir Arthur Dayne chief among them. He couldn't hear what they were saying, nor did he much care since their handling of the situation was set to be so bad it led to an all-out war. Then, with that thought, Jon found himself on an all-too-familiar knife edge. The arrest had happened, but it wasn't too late to stop the war. Even as he dared to hope, his brother's voice chimed in his memory once more. "The ink is dry." "Jon!" Rosier's voice jolted him out of his reverie. He turned to find the prince standing at his side, looking out over the gunwale into the impenetrably waters of Blackwater Bay. His silver-blonde hair caught the moonlight, along with the sword at his hip. "Your Grace, you have to get Brandon out of there, or it will be war," he blurted out. The prince looked neither surprised nor particularly moved. "Maybe that's what my father wants." Jon felt the pieces slotting together, a dead weight settling in his stomach. Aerys knew Rhaegar and the Lords Paramount were plotting against him. He'd known since Harrenhal. Now he was using Brandon to draw the Lords out. A deliberate trap, even if it was one that could cost them everything. Better still, it was testing the loyalty of the king's own son and setting his new wife's family against him. "I don't understand, Your Grace," Lyanna wrote to her brother explaining everything. He stammered, mouth dry now. Rosier merely shrugged. Seems the explanation was insufficient, and Lord Stark is enraged regardless. He realized then that the prince was unaware of the allegations made against him. But before he could say anything, the prince added, "Besides, ravens go missing all the time, and I'd wager I can guess what happened to this one. A victim of much smaller birds, no doubt." "Varys?" Jon asked. "You think he intercepted it?" The prince shrugged. "I don't know anything for sure, but I am determined to find out." As they lapsed into silence, Jon found his mind racing ahead. He was of military age and known by the prince to be a skilled swordsman. He knew he would be asked to fight if war broke out. Asked to fight for the royal army, not knowing that he would be taking up arms against his future father. Furthermore, fighting for an army against his own house, knowing full well they would lose. "Surely your father does not want a war," Jon stated. "If he is not in his right mind, surely you can talk to him even if he does think you're out to get him." Whatever else the prince was, he wasn't a fool. "He's mad, Jon. Are you still clinging to the notion that you can reason with a madman?" Jon felt his heart sink and turned his face to the stars above, cursing loudly. Jon watched from the prow of the ship as the Red Keep sailed into view, materializing through the morning mists. Although he knew already that it was smaller than Winterfell, he was still somewhat taken aback by how small it was in comparison. As though he had built it up in his head, the real thing was almost a disappointment. Regardless, it was a fortress he had always wanted to see. But now that he'd arrived, he could only feel a sickening dread as he remembered how many of his kin had died within those walls. Not just those destined to come soon, but his father and Jory and Vayon Pol. All those who had gone south with father and never come back again. They sailed further up the Blackwater, passing the castle so that his only view was of the red curtain walls that ringed the city itself. It was still too early for the fishermen to be heading out or the markets to be swinging into action, but he saw a line of armored men standing on the dockside, still too far away to make out their faces. All Jon could see were the breastplate and swords glinting in the morning light. Once he had seen them, he could not take his eyes off them. "Are they yours?" he asked, turning to the prince. Even Rhaegar looked tetchy as he looked out over the water, front teeth troubling his lower lip. "Gods, I hope so." The latest rumors from the Red Keep were that the whole court had split into two factions, those for Rhaegar and those loyal to Arys. In Rhaegar's absence, the hostilities had escalated. As such, Jon had hoped Rhaegar would tell him he always had this reception committee, but no reassurances came. Worse, Rhaegar buckled his sword belt as if expecting trouble. Likewise, Jon wrapped his hand around Longclaw's hilt, his mouth running dry with apprehension as the ship docked. "Sir Jaime Lannister," said Jon, homing in on the only face he recognized. "He's with you, isn't he?" "I don't know," replied the prince. "His father certainly isn't with my father. I can tell you that much. But whether that means he is with me for sure, I cannot say." He paused, studying the unmoving faces for a long moment before breathing a sigh of relief. "Sir Barristan, Jon Connington." "We're all right, Jon. Stand down." Jon didn't know who Connington was, but it was enough that Rhaegar obviously saw him as a friend. Still, he remained close to the prince's side as the other two men boarded the ship and approached them with stony faces.
"Your Grace."
"Thank the gods you have come," the man Jon assumed Connington stated. "All 7 hells have broken loose since you've been gone. Several of the Northmen have already been executed. Lord Rickard rides south with a host of 200. Brandon Stark," Rhaegar cut over him, urgently. "Is he already dead?" "No, Your Grace," Connington assured him. "He's lodged in the Black Cells." Rosier looked visibly relieved. "Who was executed?" "Geoffrey Mallister of Segard, Elbert Aaron of the Vale, and Kyle Royce, also of the Vale." Connington answered, "One Ethan Glover still lives, lodged in the Black Cells with his master." Jon's stomach clenched painfully at the sound of so many familiar names. Meanwhile, Rhaegar simply looked mildly inconvenienced. "What in 7 hells is my father playing at?" he demanded. "Did he not even think to ransom these men?" It was Sir Barristan who spoke next. "The king's blood is up, Your Grace. Proceed with caution." Rosier swore under his breath as they disembarked the ship. Mounts were waiting for them on land, including one for Jon himself. Once they were moving toward the Red Keep, he could look up at the walls of the castle and discern the fresh harvest of heads spiked along the battlements. The prince saw them too, but said little as Jon Connington filled him in on all that had been happening. "Brandon Stark charged into the throne room while your father and that lackwit Merryweather were hearing petitions and demanded Your Grace come out and fight," he said. "Sir Barristan saw it, did you not, sir?" "No, he and I both saw it. His exact challenge was for you to come out and die. Nothing can save Stark now, Your Grace." Sir Barristan looked regretful as he turned in the saddle, facing both Jon and the prince. "I tried to talk Lord Stark down before he went in there, Your Grace. I told him what would happen, and he wished your death anyway. It was high treason." Jon knew that. To wish or incite death on the king or his heir was punishable by death. Surely, his uncle would have known it, too. His father always said Brandon had the wolf blood. But that was more than wolf blood. It was stupidity, too. Armed with the facts, Jon was torn between attempting a daring rescue and just leaving him to suffer the consequences of his own rash actions. His own sudden contempt left even himself feeling shocked. "Are all Northmen being rounded up?" asked Rhaegar. Jon noted that the prince briefly glanced at him from the tail of his eye. By Northmen, Rhaegar meant him. Suddenly he felt self-conscious, like he was stealing into enemy territory. The last time he felt like an unwelcome intruder, he'd been undercover with the wildlings. "Also have a care," Sir Barristan stated bluntly. The 3 other men all stopped and looked at Jon, who looked back at them in high uncertainty. But I wasn't with Lord Stark." "I know," Rosier cut in, "but my father thinks you're his bloody squire from Harrenhal." "Oh shit!" Connington huffed. "Well, who is he then? I thought he was Stark's little brother when I first saw him." "No, Jon. This Jon is Lyanna's cousin from the north. Stark blood in him, though, for sure," Rhaegar answered, then turned to Jon himself. "Look, don't worry. I know a secret way into Makar's holdfast. I'll take you in that way and fetch you a livery." Another Jon," said Jon Connington. "Never mind, I'm sure I'll remember which one is me." It was an attempt to lighten the mood, but it failed miserably. The 4 of them continued looking as tense as they did before they brought their horses to a gallop. Jon looked over his shoulder to see where all those other armed men had gotten to. A few had followed. Others had ridden ahead to clear the roads, but others seemed to have vanished. It was small wonder everyone he knew was so suspicious of this place. When they reached the Red Keep, Rhaegar's secret entrance involved scaling an outer wall and crawling through a narrow vent barely wide enough for a small child. Mercifully, he and the prince were lean enough to just about squeeze through, pulling themselves along until they hit a metal grill over an internal wall somewhere in Maegor's itself. The prince shoved it hard, so it fell to the floor with a sharp clatter, then jumped down into his own private chambers. After a second spent assessing the distance from opening to floor, Jon did the same. Relieved to be out of that airtight, suffocating vent, he drew a deep breath to steady himself again. "I'll get you a livery now," said the prince, dusting himself down. Having gone first, he had become covered in loose mortar and cobwebs. "It won't be enough to fool my father, but it will get you anywhere and everywhere within this city." "Thank you, your grace," he replied. While the prince went in search of a livery, Jon couldn't resist having a look around his private rooms. There was a terrace overlooking the bay, framed in twisting green vines. A bell pull for the servants was above a large tester bed, and the three-headed dragon was everywhere he looked. On the ceiling, in the bricks, and even on a brass doorknob, there was a wide hearth, currently unlit, seeing as his servants were not expecting him. Rosier returned sooner than Jon expected, laden with clothes. "You're the same size as me, so I just grabbed these." They were better than any clothes he had ever had before. Soft woolen black breeches, a black satin jacket with the Targaryen sigil embossed on the left breast, and a white silk undershirt, also with the Targaryen sigil stitched over the breast. Jon held the black jacket for a moment, feeling the fabric and tracing over the sigil. It was hard for him to not laugh. "I lived all my life as a bastard, but when I put on this livery, I'll be as good as a Targaryen." Rhaegar didn't understand. No prince could ever understand what it was like to be a bastard, to be a stain on someone else's honor, because of someone else's actions. Nonetheless, Rhaegar smiled as though he were genuinely happy for him. "Congratulations, Jon," he replied. "It seems you've come up in the world." Rhaegar felt sick as he looked up at his father, entangled on the barbs of the throne. They always did say the throne rejected those unworthy to sit on it, and the prince couldn't help but think it an omen of things to come. However, despite his discomfort, the king soon noticed his son waiting for an audience, and it had now come to this. Rhaegar, like any other subject, had to make an appointment to meet with his own father. One thing he did notice was that the throne room was almost empty now. None of the courtiers hung around unless they had to. No one wanted to be in the Mad One's line of sight unless they had to be. Only the King's Guard remained. Sir Arthur Dayne was there, with Gerald Hightower at his side. But Cyril Barstan and Jaime Lannister stuck with him. "Rhaegar, you should be thanking me," Arryn said, disentangling himself from a particularly vicious barb. He then pointed to Rhaegar, as though singling him out with one bloodied finger. "I saved your life, you bastard ingrate. I saved your life so you can carry on plotting against me." The hand of the king, Owen Merryweather, shuffled some papers and cleared his throat. Rhaegar pitied him. It was the Hand and Master Pycelle who were struggling to keep the two court factions apart, while negotiating some kind of common ground between them. But they were out of their depth now. "Your Grace," he said to the king, then turned to Rhaegar. "My Lord of Dragonstone, I wrote to the Lord Fathers of the men apprehended and informed them they are now regarded as outlaws." "Never mind that," Rhaegar cut over him. "I want to hear how my beloved father saved my life." "I saved your life from that cunting frozen aurochs." Yaris bellowed down at him, straining forward in the throne. A vein popped at his temple, giving him a particularly demented appearance. "He came charging in here, threatening to kill you, and now here you are, whimpering on about trials and fairness, and words spoken in anger. Empty threats. Empty fucking threats," says he. Rhaegar bit his tongue so hard he could almost taste blood. He had come in search of compromise, to see if Brandon Stark's treason could be passed off as nothing more than an idle threat spoken in rage and misunderstanding. But his father was beyond reason. Even now he was raging on and hurling down insults. "Sometimes," he stormed from atop his lofty perch, "I think the best part of you was left running down your mother's legs the day you were born." He broke off there and laughed heartily at his own vulgar insults, laughter that echoed around the chamber. It only stopped when he tried to stand up and tore his cloak on another jutting blade, whereupon the laughter turned to curses. He tried to dismount the steps, but almost fell. Had it not been for Sir Arthur Dayne catching him in time, Aorys might have fallen and skewered himself. So close, yet so far. Initially, Rhaegar stepped backwards to let his father pass. But at the last minute, his feelings changed and he grabbed the man, pulling him closer. He held Akos so close they were almost in kissing distance. Akos was too stunned to say or do anything. The king's guard powerless to act against their future king. For a long moment, Raka looked into the other man's eyes, searching for any lingering trace of sanity in that frazzled mind. "If you have even a split iota of love left for our family," Rogier hissed at him, "if you have even a shadow of reason left in you, you will bring Lord Rickard to the council chamber and accept his offer of ransom. If not, you will plunge this realm into chaos." Stunned silence was his answer, a silence broken only by Lord Viserys shifting into the light. Rogier had not noticed him before, but that was always the eunuch's way. Meanwhile, the prince refused to break eye contact with his father. "Chaos," Viserys whispered, trying to pry the prince's fingers from off his face. "I love a little chaos in the morning." "Father," Rogier insisted, almost pleading now. He had to make Viserys see what he was doing. "Father, please, think of your grandchildren." "Do you?" he snapped back. "You weren't thinking of your children when you broke the Dornish alliance, were you? You weren't thinking of the children when you fucked that wolf whore. Where is now, eh? Where is she? On Dragonstone. Is she happy there? Should I invite her to court? She'll want to see her father again after all this time?" Rogier released his grip on Aerys so quick it was as if he'd been burned. Disgust and revulsion swept over him, and he knew he could take no more. "Are you threatening the new princess?" He already knew Agrias wouldn't answer. It was another game he was playing, and the Mad One took great delight in looking his son in the eye and laughing quite happily before ambling on his way. While Aerys left, Varys remained. Rakagura watched him for a moment, almost choking on that sickly sweet perfume the eunuch wore. He was starting to fill out too. His silks were beginning to strain against his belly. The prince felt little but contempt for the man. "What do you want?" he demanded acidly. "To tell you something," Varys replied, quite unfazed. His silks whispered across the tiles as he closed the gap between them. "You'll know everything, my lord. What you don't know is that Lord Rickard Stark, with a host of 200 men, is now less than a day's ride from the city gates, and that your father has written to Lord Jon Arryn, demanding he bring Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon to court for execution." Rogier was disgusted. "Lord Arryn would never comply. He will call his banners and join his strength with the North, and if Brandon Stark dies..." He trailed off as he tried to imagine the consequences. If Brandon Stark dies, the Lady Catelyn would be wed instead to Eddard, bringing the Riverlands into any war that might break out. Varys finished for him. "My lord, I beg you, ride for Casterly Rock and make terms with Lord Tywin." Rogier felt chilled to the core, bile rising in his throat at the thought of having to go to Tywin on his knees. "We still have the Tywells and the Dornish. Azea has agreed to keep the alliance intact. We also have Ser Chiame Lannister here. Tywin will want to fight on our side for his son's sake alone." "One can hope," Varys replied, "but one can never be too certain with a man of Tywin's steeliness. And he has another son," Rogier murmured. "Oh, they say he loathes the dwarf," Varys pointed out, as if spotting the silver lining in the gathering storm clouds. "So you have that to bank on. But then there's the small matter of your new bride. Lady Lyanna, your father meant what he said. You know, about inviting her to court to see her brother and father." Rogier didn't doubt it. He knows she's on Dragonstone. "And some of those men who were on the docks when I arrived will already be on their way to Dragonstone to drag her out by the roots of her hair," Varys answered. "If need be..." "Shit," Rogier cursed, the echo answering him back. "He's bringing this realm and everyone in it to hell, all to punish me for setting Yaya aside." "Go, get her to safety and salvage what you can with the Lannisters," Varys advised him. "Tarry no more." He did not need to be told twice. With his heartbeat racing, he ran for Maker's Holdfast and took the steps up the tower 3 at a time. Jon almost jumped out of his skin when he kicked the door in. He was still dressed in livery, so no guards would dare stop him as he fled the city. "We have to get back to Lyanna right now," he blurted out. Jon was on his feet, brow furrowed deeply, but he did not protest. "Why? What's happening?" Rogier was already throwing clothes into a bag. "My father sent men to Dragonstone to haul her into court. If they get her, she'll be burned alongside her stupid fucking brother." If he had any more questions, he did not ask them. He shot back to his feet as if he'd sat on a moat spike and headed straight for the door. On the way out, Rosier rallied Sarah Barristan and found John Connington in the outer gallery. It would have to be the four of them against however many his father had sent. There was no time to raise more without arousing his father's suspicions. Sansa opened her eyes as soon as she felt the sun on her face. It was not the warm, gentle kind of sun she remembered from King's Landing, either. It was hot and dry, and soon burning her pale skin. Brienne quickly led her towards the shadow of a tall sandstone tower, currently guarded by men she knew to be Kingsguard. She didn't recognize any of them by sight, but she knew the sigils and could guess the rest. "Sir Arthur Dane," she gasped. He was running an old oilcloth down the length of Dawn's milk glass blade, completely oblivious to their presence. Bran had seen this before, so wasn't quite so impressed. After Dane, she noticed a Hightower, Gerald Hightower. The only connection she made was that he was Queen Margaery's uncle. The third was a Weemed. She had seen him at Harrenhal, but she could not recall his name. "Any minute now," said Bran, nodding to the distant horizon. All Sansa could see was an empty vista of rolling hills and dust so fine it looked like sand. Not even plants grew here. It was so dry, but as she scanned all around her, the sound of hoofbeats reached her, approaching fast. She whipped around to the source of the noise, seeing the dust cloud long before she could make out any faces. Then, "Father," she said. He led the way, with Howland Reed following close behind. Then came Willem Darry, followed by Ethan Glover, rescued from the black cells beneath the Red Keep. She recognized Martin Castle only because he so strongly resembled his son, Jari. The others she could not make out. Meanwhile, the few Kingsguard had drawn their swords and braced themselves for confrontation. It was 7-on-3, an easy fight for her father, or so she thought. But when her father and his small host drew level with the tower, there was no immediate onslaught. Her father merely dismounted and approached the three Kingsguard. "I look for you on the Trident," he said. It was Sir Geralt who answered. "We were not there." Leaving the shade of the tower, Sansa approached the men while listening to the back and forth between them and Ned. It seemed almost like father was taunting them for not being at the battles or the siege of Storm's End or anywhere else important. But for this lonely tower, she thought her father had a bloody good point. She drew level with the men just as Sir Arthur spoke for the first time. "Now it begins." Her father looked sad rather than frightened as he answered, "No, now it ends." Before she could even blink, the two sides met in a storm of steel, swords and dust. Oaths and cries rang out as blows were landed. Seconds later, a man was dead at her feet. Sansa leapt back, just as a woman screamed, shrill and high. She almost thought it was her for a second, but the cry came again from high above. She whipped around towards the tower, shielding her eyes from the sun to get the uppermost window in view. There was a woman in there, she realized. They passed Rickard Stark's retinue as they boarded the ship for Dragonstone. In that moment, Jon knew he had a choice: stay and fight for the Northmen, or fight for his aunt. He hesitated as he saw the dire wolf banners moving through the crowded streets of King's Landing. Then he thought of his aunt being hauled from Dragonstone by the Mad King's men and, in the end, the decision hadn't been so hard after all. The ink is dry, he reminded himself, and Lyanna must live, even if no one else does. The journey seemed to pass in a haze of agonizing slowness. In his mind, he knew the king's men would already be there, holding Lyanna until she agreed to come with them. Rhaegar had sent a raven, telling her explicitly not to leave the castle with anyone under any circumstances, and all they could do was pray to the old gods and knew that she got it. By the time they arrived, they were tired from the journey and a sleepless night on board the ship, but as soon as Jon's feet hit solid ground, his energy returned and he had drawn his sword before even reaching the sally port. Rhaegar was at his side, armored and ready for the fight, with Barristan Selmy and Jon Connington hot on his heels. "Ready, sirs?" asked Rhaegar. "Let's end this now," Connington replied on all their behalfs. By way of assurance, Jon turned to Rhaegar and said, "Remember, Lyanna wouldn't let them get her without a fight." He was still sick with fear and worry, but that soon melted away as they charged through the main doors of the Drumkeep. The first person they saw was a terrified maid, and flung herself against the wall before they could run right over her. "They're upstairs, my lords," the woman spluttered. "More than 20 of them." "They are, with a lady a prisoner in her room." "She's in there now?" Rhaegar asked, almost pinning the poor maid to the wall in desperation. She managed to nod, at which the prince released her and breathed a sigh of relief. All four of them had their swords at the ready as they approached Lyanna's outer gallery, and Jon could hear a battering ram crashing against the door. They all heard it, urging them on as they raced toward the scene of the commotion. "Stand down and return to the capital in peace," Rosierka commanded, stepping out in front. Jon, Barristan, and Connington were taking no chances, and they all formed up behind their prince, swords held outright, ready for the fight. Finally, the intruders dropped the battering ram just before the doors caved completely and took up their swords. They were all dressed in hauberks with fine castle-forged blades on them. "The king sent us," one of them replied, defiantly. "More than our life's worth to go back without the wolf girl." "Aerys is going to kill them if they fail," Jon whispered. "No way will they stand down." "Agreed," said Connington. "We're just wasting time here." With no further ado, the two sides met in a clangor of steel. Rosier lunged in first, as good as decapitating one and flinging him so hard against the wall he knocked a dent in the plaster. Meanwhile, Ser Barristan fought two men single-handed, while Jon himself cut and thrust at another, clinging to the prince's side as they cut through the men. In the heat of the fight, the battered chamber doors were kicked open and Lyanna appeared, dented half-helm on her head and a sword grasped in her hands. "What took you so long?" she demanded, surveying the carnage before her. "I near died from boredom waiting for the fight to start." She kicked the legs out from under one of the men and thrust her sword through his heart. Jon cut down another before he had a chance to kill Liet while she was momentarily unarmed, then swung for another before he could hit the prince. As he fell, Rigay finished him off with a swift downward thrust of his sword. Connington, Barristan, and Jon teamed up to deal with the last handful while Rigay rushed to Lyanna's side, and it was over, as quick as it began. Breathless and dazed, Jon looked around the chamber, at all the dead cat's paws. They had castle-forged steel, but not one of them was castle-trained. But it was too late to care about that now. "Liet," he said, turning to his bloodied aunt. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him, managing a smile. "Don't worry about me." Not that he needed to. Rhaegar was sat on the floor, holding her gently in his arms, and wiping the blood from her face. Clearly, she still had no idea of what was going on in King's Landing. "It's no longer safe for you to stay here," Rosierka said to her. "Who are they?" she asked. "They told me you sent them to bring me to court. They even had your seal, but I got your raven an hour before they arrived." While Rosiera filled her in on the details, Jon entered his aunt's chambers to wash his face. The double doors would need replacing, but the battering ram would be good firewood. Not having gained access to the chambers, there was no damage inside. The wardrobe doors were ajar, and he could see where Lyanna had hidden at the back, covered in Rosiera's cloaks. Once he had washed, he dried his face on a rough linen cloth. He lowered the cloth and found Rhaegar looking back at him. "Your Grace, whatever my father's done to the Northmen, it won't be safe for either of you here anymore," the prince explained. "And when he learns we killed his cat's paws, he will be furious." Jon shrugged. "So what do you suggest?" "I have a private residence in Dorne," he replied, removing a bunch of keys from his belt and handing them to him. "I want you to take her there, and I'll join you as soon as I can. It's called the Tower of Joy." Jon nodded, accepting the keys. "The Tower of Joy?" Sansa hesitated before entering the tower, looking back at the dead men whose blood now soaked the arid terrain. Only her father and Lord Reed remained, their expressions dulled with pain and grief. The silence that followed the fighting rang in her ears, and she stood there transfixed until Bran touched her arm. "Sansa, come on," he urged her. Even as he spoke, their father ran past them and took the sandstone steps 2 at a time. It was enough to give her the jolt she needed, to remember why they had come here. As if she needed another reminder, a scream rent the silence once more. Despite the heat, her flesh crawled with goosebumps as she ran after Eddard. Once inside the tower, they were met with a wooden stairwell leading to the first floor. At the top of those stairs, a wooden door stood open. Before they entered, they had to duck out of the way as a maid appeared carrying a bowl of bloodied water, and Mess came staggering out. Her face was flushed and her brow was smeared with someone else's blood. It made her dread what she and Bran were about to find inside. "It'll be all right," she said, more to herself than Bran. In response, he squeezed her hand and led her inside, to where their father knelt at the bedside of their dying aunt. Even Lyanna's bedsheets were soaked in blood, and she was too weak to sit up. There was another maid close by, folding linen sheets, but Sansa soon lost interest in her and focused on Lyanna and father. I did not think you were coming, brother. Lyanna's voice was a hoarse whisper. Shush, Lie. Rest now, and you will be well. No, she cut him off tremulously. You know it isn't. She managed to raise her free hand, showing him the blood that dripped from her fingers. Sansa looked again at the patch of blood oozing through the covers. It looked like they had cut her open. When she studied her father's face, he looked like he was in denial, as if he couldn't see what was right in front of him. You're not going to die, he insisted, soothing her brow. We can get a meister, some clean water, then you can rest. I can't lose you, Lya. Bran stiffened at her side, then nodded to the third person in the room. The woman who had been folding linen had now wrapped a small bundle in that same linen. Swaddling clothes, she realized, even though this was what she had suspected all along. The confirmation came as a full-body blow. We called him Jaehaerys, Lyanna said, drawing Sansa's attention again. Look after him, Ned, please. Robert will kill him, you know he will. Sansa remembered Aegon, and she knew her father did too. He trembled as he took the tiny newborn in his arms, as though afraid of dropping him. A silent tear traced a line through the dust on Eddard's face. Promise me, Ned, Lyanna pleaded, fearful and weak. She was getting weaker by the second, and her following plea was all but inaudible. Promise me. I promise, he swore, still cradling the infant. The anguish in her father's face was so clear that Sansa could feel it herself. She moved to stand by his shoulder, where she could see the gray-eyed baby. It was Jon. She knew it was Jon. She looked to Bran, and she could tell he knew it too. Nothing has changed. He's still our brother. It had become almost a mantra that Bran had repeated more for his own benefit than hers, since they found out the truth. But Sansa knew otherwise. It changed everything. It strengthened their hand in the game, while simultaneously placing on a political knife edge. Should the wrong person find out, they all would soon feel the bite of the blade at their necks. Of course he's still our brother, she would answer flatly. It almost made her laugh, at first. For all those years, she would stick her nose in the air and haughtily correct her siblings. He's our half-brother. Now when she wanted nothing more than to embrace Jon as her brother in name, blood in deed. He turns out to be a cousin, a prince, a potential future king. The motherless bastard from the south is the piece of the game none of the others had bargained on. The knowledge made her want to shout it from the turrets for Varys, Baelish, Cersei, and all those other plotters and schemers to hear. However, Baelish had taught her all she knew, and she knew better than that by now. The best weapons were secret weapons. Before all that, however, was the personal side. Sometimes, it felt like she had lost a brother. At others, she genuinely agreed with Bran, and that nothing had changed. Jon was their brother. They were his siblings. But she knew too much of the world to really believe it. In her heart, it felt like a loss, like a brother had died. While she reflected on all that had occurred, Bran hauled the carcass of a whole buck in Sonyor's pit, deep beneath Winterfell. She got up to help him, grabbing the beast's hind legs and helping to swing it over the precipice, where it hit the stone walkway with a dull thud. Either side of the walkways, the hot springs boiled and churned. Moments later, the waters surged even more ferociously than before, until Sonyor himself broke the surface, sending up surges of scalding hot water. She smiled as he rose in the air, his wings beating a strong wind around the cavern. His blue and silver scales glistened, water hissing off the surface of his skin. Sodier was so big now he had caused structural damage to the chambers surrounding his pit. Chunks of masonry had fallen, and there were scratch marks on the walls and stone ledges where he had landed and climbed the walls. Still, he had space to fly and stretch his wings. However, his favorite place of all was languishing deep in the hot springs and rolling around in the waters. He always seemed to be there when they came to feed him. Now he was tearing at the buck, searing the flesh, and gulping it down. Before they returned to their tree, they would have to find him at least 2 more to keep him going. Meanwhile, her mind soon wandered back to the problem at hand. We need to tell Jon as soon as possible, she said decisively. He needs to know before he comes back to us. Bran looked reticent. Would it not be a kindness to wait? If he finds out Lyanna and Rhaegar are his parents? Well, you know what might happen. What? She shrugged. Jon won't do anything stupid, you know that. I still think we should discuss it with the three-eyed raven, he insisted, but Sansa wouldn't countenance it. No, for now we keep this between the 3 of us. Then whoever else is told is entirely up to Jon. Too many people knowing is dangerous. You know it is. They lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was easy to talk about telling Jon, but actually doing it was something altogether different. How would they break the news to him? What would they say? She couldn't even begin to guess at his reaction. Grief, disbelief, even anger as well, she would think. Anger at the lies and deceit. Anger that would make him worryingly unpredictable. She sighed deeply, turning her attention briefly back to the dragon. You're right, Bran eventually spoke. I think you should be the one to tell, though. I mean, you're a girl, aren't you? Sansa laughed. Well spotted. No, I just mean girls are better at that sort of thing, he hurriedly explained. Especially you, because you're all gentle with people. You ought to be there to support him too, she said, just in case he was trying to slip the hook. Of course I'll be there. He's still our brother after all. It was going to be hard. The longer they delayed, the harder it would be. But Sansa was resolved to it by the time they left, searching for more dragon food from Winterfell's kitchens. Above ground, the well-oiled war machine was swinging seamlessly into action as the North reeled from the deaths of Lord Rickard and Brandon. She remembered when Robb was declared king in the North, and Cersei had told her all the lords of the North had assembled at Winterfell under the pretense of the Harvest Feast. Well, these lords weren't even pretending anything. They were openly rebelling against the Targaryens. If she loitered in the courtyards, close to the forge, she could see the banners of Karstark, Manderley, Mormont, Umber, and Glover. Serwyn and Hornwood were just beyond the walls, and the Boltons were making their way beneath the portcullis as they left the crypts. Her stomach churned as she watched Roose Bolton marshal his troops inside. Poor Benjen had been left alone to orchestrate this vast assembling host. She could see Roose Bolton murmuring words of condolence in the boy's ear. Empty words, no doubt. Sensei, Bran addressed her softly when he noticed her looking for a little too long. His day will come soon. With that assurance, she turned her back on the Boltons and all the others, following her brother to where the carcasses were kept. She remembered Sonya then, how big he was getting, and the strength of his beating wings. The Boltons' day would indeed come. Soon enough, happiness washed over Jon as he took in his first view of Dorne, with Lyanna at his side. Two children of the North getting their first real taste of hot, exotic sunshine. In the far-off distance, he could discern the peaks of the red mountains puncturing the azure skies. Even the air smelled different, felt different. Hot and dry, mixed with the salt of the sea spray. Never before had he seen sea he wanted to strip off and dive into. It was almost too much for Lyanna, whose knees buckled as she stood at the gunwale of the ship. Whoa, he yelled, catching her fall just in time. Although still woozy, she quickly came to as he sat her on the deck. Gods, I don't know what came over me. Jon could hazard a guess. Grief, exhaustion, and guilt. She hadn't slept a wink since learning of the murders of her brother and father. He heard her pacing her cabin during the nights, or tossing and turning on the small bunk. Her eyes were lined with deep, dark circles, and her face was drawn and pale. She had not touched a morsel of food since leaving Dragonstone. When the prince first broke the news to her, she had paced back and forth, repeating over and over, I don't understand, I don't understand. After a good half hour of that, she had buckled and broken down in Jon's arms. You need to rest, he told her once again. They were about to disembark, so there was slim chance of that. They had a long journey to the Tower of Joy ahead of them. One they began on horseback. Several hours later, Lyanna rallied once. She was mounted, some of her old self returning as she got back in the saddle, at one with her new horse, half-centaur. His father had always said, her and Uncle Brandon, Jon tried to cheer her by racing her across the open plains. But soon their chilly northern bodies became overwhelmed by the heat and had to slow down. Only when darkness fell did they find relief from the remorseless sun. Why don't you try to eat some, he asked, pushing a plate of roasted goat in her direction. A campfire blazed in front of them, and the smells of the searing meat made his stomach rumble all the louder. But Lyanna seemed almost repulsed by it. I can't, she murmured, pushing his hands away. Not wanting to be a nag, he gave up and ate her share himself. Meanwhile, their escort was setting up camp nearby, affording him a distraction to keep himself occupied. He finished up and went to help, leaving his aunt to her thoughts by the fireside. Come morning, they set off again, shortly before the sunrise. He could tell, just by looking at her, that Lyanna had had another sleepless night. By the time they reached the foothills of the Dornish mountains, she was listless and waxy-skinned. Semi-conscious with exhaustion, he would have called a halt, had it not been so urgent to get her to safety. By now he knew the rebellion would be well underway. "Can someone fetch a maester?" he asked, looking round at the guards. They looked back at him, blank-faced. "The nearest town." "That will do," Jon cut over the man, not letting him finish. At first he thought they would protest, but after exchanging a glance with his colleague, he turned his horse around and rode off the way they came. His horse's hoofs sent up a large dust cloud as he cantered off, demonstrated the dry heat of the place they had come to. The land was as featureless as the far north, with just a polar opposite climate. "I'll be all right," Lyanna assured him, drawing level with his horse. "You won't," he replied bluntly. "Not unless you eat something and get some rest." She answered with a non-committal shrug and urged her mount onwards. By the time they called a halt, several hours later, she was leaning dangerously in the saddle. From that point on, he was no longer prepared to take the risk of traveling farther. They set up camp again, while Lyanna finally nibbled at some roasted mountain hare their guides had hunted earlier. Something Jon took as a positive sign. "Here," he said, pouring some strong ale into a cup for her. "Drink this." She accepted gratefully, gulping deeply at the contents. To his further relief, she immediately perked up. "I still don't understand what happened," she said, gazing into the campfire. "I wrote to Robert, Brandon, and Father together. How could he have just gone running into the Red Keep like that? He knew where I was." Jon had been curious about that himself. "I cannot answer, but I intend to find out." She didn't take her eyes from the flames as she replied, "You know what's happening, don't you? You knew this war was coming. It's why you didn't want me with the prince. But if you had told me..." Guilt lanced through him as he realized she thought he could have stopped it by telling her the truth. But he knew he couldn't. The ink was dry, or so Bran kept telling him. History had its own way of sticking to the rules. "What would you have done if I had told you?" he asked, no longer able to meet her eyes. "That's not the point, though," she replied, frowning. "It all comes down to the fact that they knew where I was, that the prince and I are married now." There was no need for Brandon to go raging into the Red Keep, demanding he come out and die. That had thrown Jon, too. He had not known about the letters, and he suspected his father didn't, either. "Maybe Robert lied," he asked, shrugging. "Maybe he told Brandon that Rhaegar abducted you and that sent him into a rage." Disagreeing, Lyanna shook her head. "No, I don't think he would have done that. Robert would be angry, he would have a drink or two. But then another girl would catch his eye and he would forget all about me. I know men like Robert. He would never keep to one woman. I rather thought he would see the breaking of our arrangement as something of a release. A narrowly dodged spell in the dungeons. Besides, he wouldn't have lied to Brandon knowing he would fly into a rage." When she fell silent, she began picking at her food again, a little and a little, until only the bones remained. She tossed them into the fire, listening to the hiss of the fat hitting the flames. Meanwhile, Jon said something he didn't even realize he would say until the words left his lips. "Robert's going to win this war." Lyanna flinched, her expression tightening. "What?" "Robert is going to win this war," he repeated, quietly. "And Rhaegar?" she asked, tremulously. Jon looked at her through the heat haze of the fire, trying to word his answer sensitively. "Rhaegar does not win this war." For a second her expression did not change. Then she laughed dryly. "You're not one to give much away, are you?" Like his new friend, the ghost of High Heart, his aunt had gorged on grief already. He fled into exile with his brother and sister. "He hasn't got a sister," she cut in. "He will have," answered Jon. "Rhaella will get pregnant again. I think the birth killed her, though." Lyanna still looked skeptical. "Aerys isn't capable, is he? I mean, the man's completely mad." "He still has a functioning," he retorted, but cut himself off before things turned vulgar. "Well, you know what I mean." "I think I do," she smiled wanly as she replied. Later that night, he lay outside his tent and looked up at the stars stretched out overhead, an endless vista of constellations, a view so clear he had not seen its like since going north of the Wall. Lyanna lay at his side, turned over and facing away from him. He could tell she was not sleeping, or just dozing fitfully at best. He could see her from the tail of his eye, but for the most part, he stuck to counting the endless stars. "Rhaegar's going to die, isn't he?" Her voice sounded muffled but painfully matter-of-fact, for reasons he could not explain. The question had also taken him completely by surprise. Still, he schooled his response, and then stopped. He owed her the truth. Now. Yes. Loose grit rustled as Lyanna sat up and looked down at him. The starlight limned her hair in silver, but her face was in darkness. I am pregnant with his child. The confession came like a kick in the gut to him. Shock, followed by disbelief. Are you sure? I have not bled these last 2 moons, she explained quietly. It's not such a surprise, Jon. We've been trying ever since the wedding. All Jon knew about pregnancy was watching from afar as Catelyn Tully birthed hers. Sickness, lethargy, and dizziness, it all made sense to him now. Slowly, he sat up himself so they would be level with each other. Closer to her, he could see the tears dripping silently down her face. He reached out, brushing the dampness away tenderly. Please don't cry, he implored her. Everything will be all right. Will it? She asked, pushing a lock of hair back from his face. Robert wins the war, Rhaegar dies, and what happens to this baby? There was no baby, he thought to himself. Father never mentioned any baby. No one mentioned a baby. There was no baby. All the possible explanations whirled round his mind. Miscarriage seemed most likely, or a stillbirth brought on by the shock of Rhaegar's death. But then, Father would have mentioned it, he knew. He would have said that Aunt Lyanna died birthing the baby that Rhaegar had raped into her belly. Jon, what will happen to my baby? She asked again, urgent now. He could hear the pleading in her voice. I never knew about any baby, he answered. Are you sure you're pregnant? I am certain, she insisted. He could hear her labored breaths in the darkness, the occasional sniffle as she struggled to keep her composure. All the while, her face was half in darkness. Only when she looked up to the stars could he see her properly. She tilted her head often, as if counterbalancing the tears that threatened to fall. I know I don't make it into your time. You as good as told me that yourself. No, he insisted. You misunderstood. I misunderstood a lot of things, but not that, she cut in. I don't even care what happens to me, Jon. All I care about is this baby. This realm can burn and me along with it, so long as my baby lives. But there was no baby, just a motherless bastard from the south, whose father refused to tell him the truth. There was no baby, he repeated hollowly. That's all I know. Although only partially visible, he could feel her gaze boring into him, the gaze so identical to his own. He felt his heart clench, his chest constricting in the process. His brain no longer wanted to take it in. Just when he thought he could not take it any more, she backed down and turned away from him again. He did not have the courage to say anything further. He too lay back, looking up at the stars and wishing himself years away. Merryweather was gone by the time Rhaegar returned to the Red, cast out and exiled, for conspiring with the Northern Lords to allow Lady Lyanna to escape Dragonstone. He thought he would be furious to hear the news, but with the realm in open rebellion against him, he no longer cared. At least, not until what happened next. Jon Connington appeared in his chambers, a familiar-looking pin badge stuck to his lapel. Rhaegar looked at it askance, then up to Jon's worried face. He's made you hand to the king? He asked his old friend. Jon raised an auburn brow. I could hardly refuse. Well, not unless you wanted me served medium rare, your grace. Certainly not, Rhaegar retorted. But, gods, Jon, you need to be careful. One false step, and you'll be in the pyre before you can so much as kiss your own arse goodbye. I had rather hoped against hope that you would be able to talk to the queen, who in turn might talk to her husband, said Jon. I'm needed on the battlefield, not in the small council with bloody Pycelle and that insufferable eunuch. The prince sighed heavily. I can try, but Aerys isn't listening to anyone anymore. Before long, they left his chambers together and made their way trough the subdued court. 200 men had been executed beyond these walls a few months ago, and the people were living in unadulterated fear. He could smell it. He could feel it oozing under the doorways and through the cracks in the windows. It was like the walls were closing in or the rooms were shrinking. Only the sight of Rhaenys buoyed him up as she came dashing around a corner, her little cat in her hands. Raising a smile, Rogier opened his arms to sweep her up into a hug. Balanced on his hip, he kissed her forehead and bounced her along with him. Giving them some privacy, Jon let himself lag behind. Have you been a good girl? He asked his daughter. Rozier looked up at him through guileless brown eyes, still clutching Baleriane, the cat. The cat didn't look too happy at being crushed between both humans' chests. Yes, Papa. And Agan, too, she answered. Mama's been sad, though. We all missed you. And I missed you too, my own heart, he answered, kissing her cheek. But listen, you have to be very grown up while I am away, and look after your mother and baby brother. Blissfully unaware of what he was really asking, she nodded her head eagerly. I always do. I know, he answered sadly. But soon you are to go to Dragonstone, where your Uncle Oberyn will come for you. And I do not know when I will see you again, but I will, I promise. I will ride down to Sunspear on my great war horse, and pick you up myself, and we'll ride back to King's Landing together. Would you like that? Rhaenys beamed brightly, and we will wave to all the people and give them our blessings. Of course, Rhaenyra assured her, forcing himself to keep a brave face, and we'll show them that you are the most gracious princess a realm could hope for. Her giggles only made him ache. To hide his distress from her, he tucked her head under his chin and looked across the gallery they were in, to where Aelia was standing in a doorway, watching from afar. The sadness in her eyes when they met his was clear as day. Still she smiled, a pale and sad smile, directed at the father-daughter scene playing out in front of her. Gently, Rhaenyra set his daughter back down. Go and play with your brother, he said, urging her along. Too young to pick up on what was really happening, she ran off and did not look back. Meanwhile, Aelia approached slowly. The anger had long gone from her, at least. Dragonstone is empty now, he said. Take the children and go there, as soon as you are able. Yeah, nodded. Thank you, Roger. No, he said firmly. Her eyes widened in shock, prompting him to clarify his meaning. No, I thank you. For our beautiful children, for being the best wife. Is this guilt talking? She asked wryly. Perhaps, he replied honestly. But that doesn't make it any less earnest. Aelia, he broke off, unsure of exactly what to say. After another second dithering, he placed one hand gently on her chest. A piece of me will always be yours. Always. So, look after yourself. He breathed a sigh of relief as she warmed to his peace offering. Her smile sweetened, her eyes softening. You too, Rhaegar. You too. With that, she walked away in search of their daughter, leaving only the scent of her perfume lingering in the empty air. Rhaenyra watched her leave with a heart full of regret for the past and hope for the future. The raven came from Dorne, confirming Lyae's pregnancy, and now the dragon had its third head, but the other two were just as important to him. Jon, he called over to his friend, I must return to Dorne as a matter of urgency. I want you to stay here and make sure Elia and the children make it safely to Dragonstone. Do you understand? I want them well out of the way in case the rebels make it this far. Jon Con nodded. As you wish, Your Grace. Although, I am confident it will not come to that. And make sure ships are on standby to carry them to Essos. Should it be needed, he added. For surety's sake, leaning in close, he whispered in the man's ear. Sail without my father, if you can. A muscle twitched in Jon's jaw, but he still nodded. Your Grace, I am yours to command. Rhaegar smiled approvingly. Good, now I must leave, but I will return as soon as I can. The Tower of Joy was as comfortable as an isolated tower in the mountains could be. However, there was a town a good 4-hour ride away, and there was fair hunting in the surrounding plains. But the landscape was featureless and seemingly endless. Lyanna slept heavily as soon as she arrived. Then the maester came and confirmed the pregnancy, and she slept some more. When she awoke, she was ravenous. They ate together, talking small talk, but something had changed between them. Jon could feel it. This goat is lovely, she said stiffly. Demonstrating her point, she jabbed her knife at the flesh on the platter. Jon nodded, equally stiff. Very nice. Wadla is a good cook. Rhaenyra was from the nearest town, a stout young woman, expecting her own baby, as good a wet nurse as any. She was cheerful and sang The Dornishman's Wife as she worked, folding linens and preparing herbs. He could hear her at that moment, singing as she scrubbed out their shared sleeping chamber. The last time he heard that song was thousands of leagues north, when Mance played it on his lute. He always did wonder how Mance knew that song. On the 4th day, Bran arrived with Sansa in tow. There was no weirwood nearby, so he had to wait for them to come to him. This time, the wait had been particularly agonizing. He met them on the stone steps that led down the side of the tower. She's pregnant, he told them without preamble. Did father ever say anything to you about her having a baby? He looked from Sansa to Bran, and back again. There was a distinct lack of surprise in their expressions. Bran bit his lip and looked at his feet. Sansa's brow creased, a sorrowful look in her sapphire eyes. "John," she said tremulously, "we must speak with you." He tried to laugh. "Why else would you be here?" Neither she nor Bran shared his humor. His own smile died and he sucked in a deep breath, glancing back up the steps to where Lyanna slept. Her sickness came and went, but it was worse than ever now, and it worried him. It made him feel inexplicably guilty. "No," he said, at length. "No, it cannot be. It cannot—" "John," Sansa spoke over him, firmly. "Sit down, please. We need to talk." All this time, and he never once suspected, all these years and he never once considered, John began to tremble as he realized the truth had been literally staring him in the face. Maybe she had a miscarriage? I mean, look at this place. Who could have a baby out here? He didn't realize his knees were buckling until Sansa caught him and held him as she eased them both down to the stone steps. She brushed a tear from his cheek, kissing the dampness away. All this time, he thought to himself again, all this time, and he never once suspected a thing. What a fool he had been. "Oh God, Sansa," he gasped as the full realization hit him. He looked at her pleadingly. "Tell me I'm wrong. Say it's not so. Say it's not true." While she held him gently, Bran backed away to afford them privacy. Somewhere at the back of his mind, he was grateful for it. "We saw it, John," she said, whispering. "She had no choice. Robert would have killed you. You know he would have killed you." Even though they'd suspected it for weeks, the confirmation came like a kick in the gut. But while he reeled, Sansa was quick to react and tighten her grip on him as he tried to stand up. Deciding it was best he remained sitting, he leaned into her and didn't care that he was sobbing openly into her shoulder. Somewhere nearby, Willa's voice sounded sweetly over the open ground. The Dornishman's wife was as fair as the sun, and her kisses were warmer than spring. Up on the battlements of the Tower of Joy, cradled between two jutting stone merlons, Jon watched the setting sun, a Lannister-like cloak of red and gold blazing over the western horizon and casting the jagged mountain peaks in silhouette. He watched without seeing, barely noticing the sun dipping below the horizon, while his thoughts continued to swirl. A few hours ago, he dismissed both Bran and Sansa, resorting to snapping at them when they proved reluctant to give him some space. Now that he had the solitude he'd so craved, he began to regret it. This far from the nearest town or village, the silence was absolute. The darker it became, the more he began to feel like the last man alive, and there was nothing but his own confusion to fill that void. Still, he didn't move. Ensconced in the crenelle, he let his feet dangle down the curtain wall and ignored the sheer drop. One of the reasons Sansa had been reluctant to leave was in case he decided to throw himself off the tower. He had no intention of doing that, but it had been an inspired suggestion for a place to come and think, to clear his head. The rest of Lyanna's guard had not yet arrived, so there would be no one around to bother him. Even Wella had ceased her singing and retired to bed, and Lyanna, "Mother," he reminded himself. Even thinking the word mother snagged somewhere in his chest. He couldn't begin to estimate the number of nights he had lain awake and wondered who she was, whether she was alive or dead, or just plain indifferent to his existence. At the same time, he had lived his life puffed up with pride by the fact that Ned Stark was his father. But that was a part of him he couldn't go back to now. He couldn't think of it. He didn't want to acknowledge it. Now he had the truth, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he had hidden away on the battlements and watched listlessly as a featureless landscape faded to black. No answers came to him. No clue appeared to point him in the right direction. He may as well be staring at a brick wall. One thing he did know was that it felt like the truth had been under his nose all along. When he thought about it all, it made sense. On some cold and logical level, it fit. He knew if he had been in Eddard Stark's position and it was Arya or Sansa in Lyanna's place, he would have done the same. He would have done it without hesitation, without a second's thought, because he loved them so much it hurt. If Robb had gotten a child on Jane Westerling, he would do the same regardless of Robb's folly. Now that he did have the truth, he wondered what he was supposed to do with it. Besides the dragon, he could think of no other reason he had been sent back. The gods had revealed this truth to him, set him on a path to find his own self, and he had, yet there he remained, in the past and living with ghosts, which could only mean there was more yet to do. Thinking about it was starting to make his head spin, and he was exhausted from it. He leaned back in the crenelle and carefully lowered himself back onto the battlements. His limbs were stiff from sitting so long. Making his way down the sallyport, he entered the tower's interior through Lyanna's door. He paused on the threshold, eyes adjusting to the darkness inside her chambers. Oblivious to his intrusion, she slept on. Although it was early days, the pregnancy was already going hard on her. If it wasn't the sickness, it was the pains in her belly or the dizziness when she stood up and tried to move, so he let her sleep on, rather than burden her with all he had found out. Soundlessly as possible, he trod through her chamber and made for the small pallet bed he had commandeered upon arrival. He knew he would not sleep, but he did wonder if staring up at the ceiling would be better than staring out into the black of night. Anything was worth a try. Surely the gods have not brought me here only to snatch me away again, he thought to himself as he undressed. If the gods had an answer, they weren't telling him. Jon eased himself down on the hard bed and turned to face the stone wall, dressed only in a long shirt left over from his stint in King's Landing. Searching for it had temporarily taken his mind off everything else. An all too brief respite, and now he was back to it. Only now, after thinking so deep while on the battlements, the silliest of things popped into his head. He wondered what would have happened if he had inherited Rhaegar's looks and not his mother's. Those indigo eyes and that silver blonde hair would be hard to explain in the north. He realized it did not matter, but still he wondered, would he be out in Essos trailing after his Aunt Daenerys and her 3 dragons? He'd heard it said that her brother was as mad as their father. "Jon, are you awake?" He'd been so lost in his own thoughts he'd not noticed Lyanna's breathing falling so silent, and the sound of her voice startled him. "Yes," he replied, turning over to face her. "Sorry if I woke you." "You didn't," she assured him. "But you didn't come back after dinner. I wondered where you were." "Nowhere. I didn't go anywhere," he stated, flatly. The bed linen rustled as she sat up properly, her feet now resting on the floor. With the shutters blocking the moonlight from without, he could not see her properly. Only a vague outline where her hair slid over her shoulders in a solid patch of darkness. Seemingly satisfied with even that vague answer, she changed the subject abruptly. "Rosier thinks it's a girl. This baby, I mean." Jon laughed, but it sounded hollow. This probably isn't the first time Roger's been wrong about something. "You wanted to name her Visenya," she added. "But that's not going to work now, is it?" "Surely Rhaegar has at least entertained the idea of it being a boy," he retorted. "Oh yes, in that case it's Jaehaerys. But something tells me that isn't going to work out either." She sounded so calm, so accepting of what was unfolding around her. It was like she had known all along, but that wasn't possible. Maybe. Like him, she was just too stunned to panic, or too numb to feel anything beyond a slight sense of wonder. It was happening, and there was nothing they could do about it. So why waste time crying about it? Jon sat up in his own bed, trying to distinguish her features in the poor light. "If things had been only a little different, we would have known each other better." She answered with a wet sniff. "You remember when you first came to us, when you said you were searching for your mother? I didn't believe you when you said Ned never told you. I honestly didn't think he would do something so mean, and I thought you were the one mistaken. But it's all starting to make sense now. From the little you've said, I can fill in the blanks myself." Her voice faltered, but Jon waited for her to continue. She turned her face to the window, where the shutters hid what lay beyond, evidently still lost in her own mind. After another sniff and a hasty swipe at her eyes, she added, "Sometimes such clarity is a curse. It's like we've spent months collecting all the pieces of a puzzle, only we're scared witless of what it'll look like once it's all slotted together. And it's madness, Jon, because I'm scared of the truth, yet I ache for it at the same time." Jon got to his feet and moved to sit beside her on the tester bed. He found her in the dark and wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as she dried her tears. "All I ever wanted was the Stark name," he admitted. "No money, nor lands or titles, just the Stark name, and I would have been happy. Father would have given me it, had it not been for Catelyn. God, she was right all along. I am no Stark, Father lied. Uncle," he reminded himself. But it made no matter. He couldn't ever see Ned Stark as anything other than a father. Now that he had the truth, he could sit back and watch as his 2 fathers destroyed each other on the banks of the Trident. That was a realization that made his heart squeeze painfully, so much so he almost physically recoiled. Only the feeling of Lyanna's hand gripping his own, her fingers lacing through his, brought him around again. "Stay with me," she said. "I'm afraid, and I don't want to be alone." Jon drew a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "There's somewhere I need to be, but once it's done, I will come back for you. I swear, I'll come back for you. Now I have you. I'll never be parted from you again. I don't want to die, she replied hoarsely. But if that's what it takes, if that's what it costs to have this baby, to have you... Once more, Lyanna faltered into silence. She seemed to sag under the weight of what she was saying, her head drooping and shoulders hunched before she suddenly looked up again. If that's what it takes, then you're worth dying for. Sansa's eyes narrowed as the young boy in the ill-fitting armor waddled into the courtyard of Riverrun. His arrival was met with gales of laughter from onlookers, but the boy's face was set with cold determination. It was something she had often seen in the eyes of the adult Petyr Baelish, too, she realized. Only this was different. She could see he was completely out of his depth. Not just the ill-fitting armor, but the way he carried the sword was all wrong. Even though she scarce knew the right way herself, she could tell he was going nowhere. The shield seemed too heavy for him, too— "Oh, Petyr," she murmured under her breath. "What are you doing?" Bran glowered. "Is that him?" "It is," she sighed. Suspecting all that she did about him, the last thing she thought she'd do was end up pitying him. But there was no denying how pitiful he looked. Skinny and short, barely armored and too inept to so much as lift his sword properly. By contrast, her uncle Brandon towered over the courtyard, his sword gripped in his gauntleted hand and a look of wry amusement on his face. Next to him, Catelyn Tully barely hid her smiles. Sansa couldn't help but wonder why she wasn't talking some sense into Petyr, or just calling Brandon off herself, but that wasn't how duels worked. She knew that really. "Come on, boy," Brandon intoned, voice amplified by his helm. "That's enough, you've made your stand. Put the sword away and we'll forget all about it." But with Catelyn looking on, Petyr was having none of that. "I challenge you to a duel for the hand of my lady." Brandon still hesitated, clearly uneasy with dueling a boy who'd had no training. After a long pause, he pulled off his helm and breastplate, leaving on the gauntlets covering his hands. "Now we are more evenly matched," he declared. "And this is your last chance, Baelish. There is no shame in admitting you made a mistake." Even without the armor, they were nothing like an even match. Brandon was huge and strong, with years of experience at his back. "Just give up, Petyr," she inwardly implored. But he did not. Instead, he approached Catelyn and begged her favor to wear. The same favor that was already fluttering from Brandon's wrist. She could see it now that he'd removed his armor. Meanwhile, Catelyn regarded Petyr with an expression torn between sadness and mockery as she rejected him again. Suddenly, Cat shoved forwards as Lysa barged past her brandishing a silk ribbon. "Here, wear my favor, Petyr." Ladies never offered their favors, Sansa remembered. It was up to the man to ask them of her. But poor Lysa looked so grateful when he accepted all the same, even though he looked desolate at picking up a consolation prize. "Why isn't Mother saying anything?" asked Bran at her side. "This is madness." Their Uncle Edmure was there too, alongside the Blackfish and countless others. None of them were saying anything either, she noted. Only Brandon had tried to offer Petyr a dignified exit, or as dignified as circumstances would allow. Curious. She and Bran moved to stand beside their mother before the mummer's farce began. Only then did she pull on Brandon's elbow. "Please, don't kill him," she whispered in his ear. "He's like a little brother to me." Brandon looked back at her and winked. "What do you take me for?" "Of course I won't kill him." Then it begun, and it also ended at the same time, or so Sansa thought. With one swift but gentle sword stroke, Petyr fell to his knees in a heap. It was almost an anticlimax, and Brandon was already on his way back to Catelyn's side. He was about to say something, but then Sansa saw Petyr scramble back to his feet with his sword in the air. He was bleeding already, but clearly not yet done. Brandon saw him coming too, and knocked him off his feet again, and once more, Petyr got back up. Brandon had barely lifted a finger against him, yet Petyr was being pulverized. Again and again, he got up and tried to attack. Every clumsy blow was blocked. Every foolish slash was met with greater force from Brandon. Sansa pitied him more and more, while Lysa wailed from the sidelines and Catelyn merely froze with a rictus grin on her face. As for Uncle Brandon, he just stood there and casually fended Petyr off without pausing for thought nor effort. "Stop this now," the Blackfish's voice boomed across the yard. "Petyr, go to your rooms." "Petyr, please," Catelyn joined her own voice to Brandon's. "Enough is enough." But Petyr wasn't listening to either of them, and Brandon's patience had snapped. Clearly sick of just swatting at this little fly, he raised his sword high and dealt a blow so hard it made Sansa flinch and recoil. Blood spurted from Padir as he buckled under the force of the blow, open from navel to collarbone. Now it was all over. The Blackfish heaved a weary sigh and entered the courtyard to pick Padir up from the dirt-packed ground. Laxaw was inconsolably wailing, all on her own. Catelyn merely linked her arm through Brandon's and walked away. Without looking back. "Brienne," said Sansa, "it's time to go." Moments later, they were back in their tree with the three-eyed raven and Mira Reed. Everyone else was out hunting and they hadn't seen Benjen since the truth of Jon's parentage was revealed to them. After a moment to catch her breath, she turned to Bran, who was struggling to sit up. "So," he began, "you think that's the real moment that started the war?" Sansa drew a deep breath before answering. "I don't know if he did it on purpose. Maybe he just wanted Brandon to die." But Brandon would never have believed him. Bran cut in. "Of course not. And Padir's too clever for that," she replied. "He would have told Robert Baratheon first, knowing Robert would go straight to Lyanna's oldest brother. It's exactly the sort of thing Padir would do, relying on others to build the web for him while he ensnared the innocent victims." Her Brandon looked doubtful. "He didn't look very clever to me." "No, he's clever," she assured him. "He's just useless with a sword, and blinded by love for Mother. When it comes to manipulating people, he's the master of the art." "After we've taken care of Sonar, we'll keep tracking him then," replied Bran. "We need to know the truth of what happened back then, now more than ever." In truth, Sansa could not tell whether Padir was motivated by revenge for his wounded pride or love for her mother. But Bran was right. They needed to find out, especially with Padir still on the loose, still manipulating every noble house in the realm. "Pedotir has the Knights of the Vale in Mola's town," she said. "I think it's time someone manipulated him in return." Brandon looked dubious again. "What do you mean?" Sansa shrugged. "I don't know yet. First we need Jon back. He's the most important. But I can use Padir to take back Winterfell. It's the least he can do. After all, he's done to us. But we have the dragon for that," Bran pointed out. "We will still need men to drive back all 5,000 of the Bolton forces," she stated. "And now the Umbers and Corstarks have joined them. That's their armies, added to the Boltons. I don't know how many men in total, but it's a lot, and we'll need more than a dragon to beat them. Then, if we get it all back, I'm going to propose marriage to Baelish." "What?" Bran choked, so loud his voice echoed around the tree. "Don't worry," she swiftly assured him. "It's only for a little while, to see if I can coax the truth out of him. I'll win his trust and then utterly destroy him." Knowing Baelish had started the Second War was bad enough, but if she detected his hand in the first as well, she knew she would have no choice. For the sake of her family, for the Targaryens, who she now knew included Jon, and for the sake of the realm, Padir had to go. Even admitting it to herself made tears well in her eyes. Alia hesitated at the top of the stone turnpike stair, the sleeping baby clutched in her arms. "You told me we weren't running away, so why are we sneaking out of the castle like rats? If the king says we're not prisoners, why can't we just walk out of the door? Anyone would think we're doing something wrong." "Aenia, please, just follow me," Reimagined implored her. "There's no time to explain." Her uncle, Lewin, had already gone ahead of them with Rhaenys. They would be halfway through the vaults by now, and if he and the princess tarried much longer, they would lose them. In an effort to make things easier for her, he held up the torch and shone as much of the light as possible down the narrow stairwell. There had been no time to light the beacons set in the walls, which rendered his job all the more difficult. To his relief, however, Elia drew a deep breath and renewed her grip on Aegon as she began her cautious ascent. He rewarded her efforts with a little more information. "I just think it's for the best if the king doesn't know you're leaving." "But aren't you coming with us?" she asked, halting again and looking at him fearfully. "No, I'll meet you there when all this is over," he assured her. "I promise." Realizing that this was no time to quibble the point, Elia followed him deep below the castle. It was cold and their footsteps echoed through the empty vaults. There was nothing down there to absorb even the smallest sounds. But Roger was relieved when he could hear his daughter's voice being carried down the darkness. It sounded like she and Lewin were still far off, almost at the opening beyond the walls. Meanwhile, he and Elia were still in the vaults. "Rogier, I don't like it. I can barely see," she said. "Where are we?" "No one's down here. It's the safest route out of the castle," he replied, wrapping his free arm around her shoulders. Macro the Cruel had built these tunnels, vaults, and secret passageways. Then he promptly killed the masons who worked on them so they could never divulge the castle's secrets. Centuries later, the boy Roger had made it his childhood's ambition to discover as many of them as possible. A secret knowledge that was coming in useful now. "I came down here all the time when I was child," he explained, trying with all his heart to make it sound like wistful reminiscing. But he couldn't altogether keep the urgency from his voice. "Not once did anyone catch me, or follow me. One time when I was 10, I went missing for days and Aerys had the whole Kingsguard searching for me. Eventually, I surfaced close to Flea Bottom, where I whiled away a few hours playing in the water with the street urchins, before returning to the castle to face my father. Gods, he was furious with me. However much he tried to make it sound otherwise, it was nervous talk. Something to take Yaxley's mind off the ominous silence that hung like a shroud over the ancient vaults. Something to take his mind off the fact that they were losing this war. Only that day, word had reached them of Robert winning 3 resounding victories in one day, close to the ruins of Summerhall, his own sacred space, sullied by that overblown rebel leader. While his father raged and burned people alive, Rogier could feel it all slipping away from them. Fortune's ebbing tide washing up the relics of their once great dynasty. Finally, they rounded a corner and sunlight reflected from the dark stone walls, up another flight of stairs, through another narrow tunnel where they emerged beyond the walls of the castle. Rogier almost wept as the fresh air fell upon her face. Meanwhile, Rogier kept his free arm around her. "See those steps leading down the cliff face," he said, nodding toward the spot. "That's where we're headed." Immediately, he located Rainsy and Lewin, making their way down the stone steps towards a small jetty. A rowboat was bobbing on the black water, waiting to carry them to a merchant ship docked farther out at sea. "Won't Aerys find us on Dragonstone?" asked Alzia as they made their way down. "He found the Stark girl there, only because he wanted all Northerners dead," he clarified. Besides, not even Aerys was mad enough to kill Aya and the children, knowing it would push the Dornish over to the rebel cause. "Still, only stay at Dragonstone a night or two. Head to Dorne, where your brothers will take you in." Out in the open again, Yaxley's strength and courage seemed to return to her. "We need to get a move on." With that, she gripped a gang and ran as fast as she could without tripping on the hems of her skirts. Down a flight of stairs, through a narrow street, and down a steep hill that led onto a stone path carved into the rock face that led to the stairs, and their escape. Rogier had dropped the torch, but kept one hand closed around Adia's upper arm as he steered her through the streets. Never the most physically robust of people, Adia's breathing soon became labored and difficult. Too soon, she began slowing down, forcing him to slow down too. "Not far now," he tried to encourage her. "Just to those steps. You know you can make it." But even as she picked up her pace, Rhaegar could see the king's men filing out into the street. Their gold cloaks glittered under the afternoon sun, their swords already drawn. "Just ignore them," he whispered in Aelia's ear. "I'll pay the Lord Commander off if need be." They slowed to a fast walk, trying to look normal. But now their path was blocked, a human barrier forming between them and Rhaenys and Lewin. For the first time since leaving those vaults, Rhaenyra's nerves prickled back to life as he found himself looking into the stony faces of the gold cloaks. Some he had managed to buy, but not all of them, and their loyalties remained split. More and more of them were crossing over to the rebels. "Gentlemen," he said, "where is your Lord Commander?" None of them answered, but they parted slowly, shuffling aside to reveal a wheelhouse clattering to a halt and blocking the beaten earth street. Rogier watched the door open with a sickening feeling of dream solidifying in the pit of his stomach. Rogier looked faintly amused when he finally appeared. "And where do you think you're going?" Aelia shrank back, clutching Aegon closer to her breast. The babe had had a drop of milk of the poppy dripped onto his tongue before they left, and mercifully he slept on. But Lewin had seen the commotion and was now making his way back up the stone steps with Rainsy in tow, not wanting to leave the little princess alone on a dangerous path. Rhaegar willed him to turn and run, but knew that would never happen. "Father," he said, looking directly at the king, "the Lyae and the children are going to Dragonstone." "You already said—" "I said no such thing." Aerys cut over him. He climbed out of the wheelhouse and stood directly in front of the prince. Measuring him up with a scowl, he added, "They stay here with me until I get the Dornish troops back on these streets. All 10,000 of them. Before Rhaegar could reply, Lewin had caught them up and pushed his way through the gold cloaks. I will be your hostage, your grace. Allow my niece and her children to go in peace. Doran would not risk my life any more than hers. Father, it makes sense, Rhaegar said. You have Jaime Lannister as a hostage for Tywin. And I want ye, the damn prince's sister, not his wretched nephew, the king retorted. Take the princess and the children back to the castle now. The gold cloaks had them circled, cutting off every escape point. Rhaegar watched them from the tail of his eye, while simultaneously keeping his father in view. Father, this will only serve to anger the Martells. Good! The king thundered. Now get her back to the castle with my grandchildren now. Astley, I looked at Elia like a cat that had cornered a fat little mouse. Lewin will return to Dorne to raise the men at arms himself. Rosieg, you're going with him. Maybe you can visit your whore at the same time. The gold cloaks closed ranks around them, slowly decreasing the circle. It was like the spiked jaws of a trap inching slowly closed. Sansa let go of the tree root and let herself fall back into her own body, still physically inside the weirwood. It was still an odd sensation, but one she was rapidly getting used to, and her real world quickly reformed before her eyes. Mira was close by, speaking with Benjen, who had returned from a late night ranging. She could also hear Brienne close by. Ever-faithful Brienne, who guarded the doors, seemingly night and day. The raven remained in his perch of roots, with the children of the forest gathered at his feet, speaking their ancient tongue. She glanced sideways at Bran, who was still deeply buried in the past. He was focusing on feeding the dragon, now deep beneath the crypts. The beast grew stronger by the hour. In the meantime, she was left to sort out the tangle of her own thoughts. There was still one person nearby who could help, and she had been doing a lot of thinking since learning the truth about Jon. Not least talking with Melisandre, who had proved a fount of knowledge without her ever finding out who Jon's parents really were. "Excuse me, Lady Reed," she said quietly, interrupting their conversation. "I must speak with my uncle." Rather than inconvenience Mira, Benjen agreed to join her outside, where they could talk privately. Safely wrapped up in a heavy fur cloak, she let Benjen lead the way outside to where the snowfalls drifted in great squalls. Several foot of snow had fallen just that morning, but it was beautiful, like an enchantment had fallen over the harsh terrain. It had been too long since she breathed the fresh air. "Did you know about Jon?" she asked, once they were clear of the others. She looked to Benjen, realizing how pale and gaunt he appeared now. There was a cut on his left cheek that had turned a grayish color, and his gray eyes were bloodshot. Bloodshot and blank at her question. "I know a great many things of our Jon," he replied, trying to smile. "Maybe you could narrow it down." "That he is Lyanna's son," she clarified, without softening the shock. Benjen stopped dead in his tracks, his brow creasing. "What did you say?" Sansa repeated herself, matter-of-factly, that he is the son of Lyanna and Rhaegar Targaryen. "You know she was not abducted and that she loved Rhaegar, so it's a wonder father did not tell you about her son." From the look on his face, she surmised that he knew nothing. He appeared genuinely shocked. But after the initial impact had worn off, he let out a long sigh, and his shoulders slumped again. "Maybe I suspected something amiss," he began. "Actually, I don't know. I mean, I thought it was odd that Ned refused to tell anyone the mother's identity. That was a strange thing. But I promise you, niece, I never knew, and I hope Jon understands that I never knew." He broke himself off, gaze sharpening. "Does Jon even know, or have you just found out through the tree?" "Jon knows," she confirmed. "I'd been meaning to talk to you, but when we came around, you'd gone on a ranging." Benjen didn't seem to have heard her. "Are you certain of what you saw?" "Certain," she affirmed. "We saw the birth. We saw Lyanna make father swear a promise to her, to raise Jon at Winterfell. Otherwise, Robert would kill him." Her explanation was met with a long pause from her uncle. Clearly still shocked, he was no longer looking at her. Rather, he gazed into the middle distance as he tried to make sense of it all. She was about to console him when he suddenly spoke up again. "He's a brother of the Night's Watch now," he said. "It doesn't matter to us who sits on that ugly iron chair. Jon knows where the real war is and might be. He'll need a reminder if he ever wakes up again." "He will," she replied adamantly. "But there's something I need to know. Fire will kill the ice monsters, won't it?" The horizon was clear now, all the way north and to the fist of the first men. But those monsters, which she had seen with her own two eyes, attacked like wildfire. You barely saw them coming. Aye, replied Benjen. But Sweetling, you know the dragons are all dead. No, they are not, she corrected him. Daenerys Targaryen hatched 3 of them. We heard about it in King's Landing. 3 living, fire-breathing dragons. Soon they will be grown enough to come to Westeros. 3. And the dragon has 3 heads, which is what Rogierra says all the time. She thought she should tell him about the Winterfell dragon, but it would only complicate her theory and divert the conversation she needed to have. Never declare your full hand. So, it's true, he said, almost to himself. Then he hardened again. They're miles away, no good to us, wherever that Targaryen girl is. We could contact her, there must be a way, she persisted. If she knows her nephew is in danger or that he might be one of the heads of the dragon, she will fly to Westeros and land in the north. No Lannister will reach her here. She'll be safe from her enemies. They're the last Targaryens, Benjen. Then who is the 3rd head? He asked, shrugging his shoulders. I don't know, she replied despondently. But why would the fire god, or whoever it is, send Jon all the way back in time just to find out something Mira's father could have told him? Benjen laughed, but not unkindly. You're asking me about the ways of a foreign god. You're asking the wrong man, child. Sansa backed down, going over 2 simple numbers in her head. 3 dragons. 2 Targaryens. 4 dragons. If they counted sonar. But that felt like a complication at this early stage. They only needed 3. Whatever truth she thought she was grasping at, she felt it slipping away from her. The larger Lyanna grew, the most uncomfortable, Jon felt, like there was another him in the room, and another him out cold, back at Castle Black. He had barely been at ease with only one him. Still, Rhaella let out Lyask's gowns and adjusted her other clothes accordingly. A little something to help ease her increasingly uncomfortable condition. Meanwhile, Jon guarded the door to the tower and patrolled the battlements. At nights, he lay in his room and talked to Lyanna in the darkness. Now that he had found out who she really was to him, he didn't know how to address her. He could hardly start calling her mother, and Lyanna suddenly felt all wrong, too. It was a small thing that had taken him entirely by surprise. 4 months into her pregnancy, the sickness abated. Holding down more food, she was soon recovering her old strength. At almost 5 months in, she even had a little sparring match with him using a wooden sword. She was quickly disarmed, blaming it on the babe growing inside her. Then he lost on purpose, just to see her smile. Word then came that Rhaegar had helped secure the Dornish alliance, something Jon thought the prince already had. But it meant that the prince was in Dorne. Jon sat between 2 Merlins on the battlements as Rhaegar and his retinue arrived. There weren't many of them, not even Sarah Barstan or Jon Connington were with him. Both presumably were off fighting their losing war. Sir Arthur Dayne was with him, however, along with Oswald, Wynne and Sarah Gerald Hightower. There was another whom Jon did not know. Lyanna's new guard, he knew, come to take over from him. His heart clenched painfully at the thought of having to leave Lyanna so soon after finding out who she really was. On the evening of the prince's arrival, they dined around a campfire. Roasted goat and vegetables the prince had brought from Sunspear. Jon, said Rhaegar, gesturing to the man unknown to him. This is Prince Lewin of Dorne. He'll be returning with us to King's Landing. Jon managed to greet the man cordially. What news of the war, your grace? We defeated the rebels at Ashford, replied Rhaegar. Or rather, Randyll Tarly did. The Lord of Hornhill beat the rebels back before even Mace Tyrell had showed up with reinforcements. A small ray of hope, for now. But now, the armies are moving toward the Stony Sept, where they'll meet again. Everything depends on the outcome of that battle. Jon knew it as the Battle of the Bells, but he kept his foreknowledge to himself. Instead, he found himself remembering Samwell Tarly and wondering if he knew what had happened to him yet. Would Sam be on his way back to Castle Black? Or would he stay on course for the Citadel and give Jon up for dead? He had never needed Sam's wise counsel more than he did now. More than that, he ached to see his best friend just one more time. And then we're going to King's Landing? He asked, returning his gaze to Rhaegar. His blood father, his real father, Lord Stark, would be fighting against him, and it was more than he could bear to think about. Not for long, he confirmed. It's time I led the army myself. How can I expect men to fight for me if I don't fight for me? Suddenly, Jon had no appetite. He excused himself and kissed Lyanna's cheek, pleading tiredness after so many late nights on guard duty. The tower was close by, still in sight, so it didn't take long for him to return. But all thoughts of a real early night were shoved aside as Bran called down to him from the battlements. As always, Sansa was at his side. He cast a quick glance back over his shoulder, where the others were still gathered around the fire and lost in their own conversation before running up the sallyport. Once back on the battlements, he noticed they had also brought the three-eyed raven with them. Brynden Rivers stood apart from the other two, looking out over the darkened mountains that surrounded them, so lost in his own thoughts that he did not turn to look at Jon. Rhaenyra said, greeting his brother with a hug. Sansa, he kissed. We're leaving for King's Landing in the morning, then the Trident, and you know what'll happen, then as well as I. I absolutely refuse to take up arms against either of my fathers. So what can I do? Hide? Sansa suggested. Jon almost choked. Hide? I beheaded a man for hiding during a battle. Once. This is a bit different, Jon, Bran pointed out. If you don't wish to blatantly hide, then play dead and let the battle rage around you. Sansa blushed, her expression apologetic as she tried to rephrase her suggestion. Maybe just sort of run around the battlefield a little bit and make it look like you're joining in. What? The commander's coming, so better look busy, he retorted, but then laughed. After the strain of all the tension, the conflicting emotions, something in him finally broke at Sansa's almost comical suggestion. However, he quickly composed himself as he looked out over the battlements of the tower. Sorry, Sansa, I'm not laughing at you, it's just a funny picture in my head. That's all. The campfire looked small from his vantage point. The people sat around it looked like tiny silhouette specks. Even so, he could pick out Rhaegar and Lyanna. After this evening, he knew they would not see each other again. A thought that filled him with sadness. While he looked over the scene, he became aware of the three-eyed raven approaching. Lord Commander, I think it's time we talked. Jon turned and met his gaze. Yes, I think it is. We'll wait for you below, said Bran, taking Sansa's arm. Come to us when you're done. Jon nodded. See you soon. As they walked off, he stood in silence with the raven. Even after Bran and Sansa had disappeared down the steps, they held that silence and simply looked over the ramparts. In the distance, Lyanna and company were still enjoying their last meal before sailing off to war, a war Jon knew they would not win. So, what are you to me? Asked Jon, looking to the raven. You mean by blood? He clarified. I think you are my great-grandnephew, or something along those lines. You were Aemon's too. Jon felt inexplicably sad at the realization that neither he nor Master Aemon ever knew what they were to each other. While the old man had been alive, tears stung at his eyes, but he did not let them fall. When all this was happening, the first time around, said Jon, when the war happened, what did you do? Surely you didn't just sit in your tree and watch through the faces as all your kin were slaughtered. What could I have done? The raven asked back. I was thousands of leagues away, and as old as the hills. I believe Aemon talked to you about that. Nevertheless, I make my own records. When the time comes, I help others as I'm helping you and your brother now. And although I can't intervene directly in current events, I make sure the truth always comes to light in the end. Jon smiled wryly to himself. And now I have the truth, yet I am still here. I told the ghost of Highheart that I needed to change something, that I needed to unite the three heads of the dragon. But that was before I knew the truth. Now I think I might be one of the heads of the dragon. The raven looked almost approving. You're learning, Jon Targaryen. The second has got to be Daenerys, Jon continued. I mean, she has to be. She's hatched them. Your aunt Daenerys is the mother of dragons, the raven confirmed. And in a circular way, yours only lives because she hatched hers in your world. It's an odd thing. But yes, she is one of the heads of the three most important dragons in the world. You are another. Now, who do you think is the third? Rhaegar, he replied, picking out the prince beside the fire. It's Rhaegar, isn't it? As always, the raven gave no explicit answer. Instead, Jon felt himself being led down a path in which he was forced to work it all out alone. What led you to that conclusion? Jon did not reply immediately. Instead, he remembered talking to the ghost of Highheart. Back then, he was merely thinking aloud and clutching at straws to explain his presence in the past. He had said to her then that he needed to alter the outcome of the war in some way that did not change the winner. But back then, he had not fully understood his circumstances. He's a Targaryen, obviously. Jon laughed at the silliness of his own answer. But there's more, isn't there? He's the one who discovered the prophecy to begin with. But it was the ghost of High Heart, who, much earlier, had predicted that the prince that was promised would be born in the line of Aerys and Rhaella. All three of us are from that line. Jon paused again, catching his breath. And it explains why I'm here. I mean, the gods are not known for organizing late family reunions, are they? So there's more to me being here than learning about my parentage or getting to know my mother. If we need all three heads of the dragon to take on the Great Other and the war that's coming, then we can't do it without Rhaegar, which doesn't solve the problem of Rhaegar being dead. And then there's the small matter of getting out of this world and back into my own. You do realize this world and your world are one and the same, the Raven stated, raising an eyebrow. Alas, I know what you mean, Lord Commander. You mean you want to return to your own time? Well, let me tell you, you get out the same way you got in. Jon rolled his eyes. Melisandre needs to revive me again, back at Castle Black. The Raven smiled, an effort to look reassuring. Something like that, Jon. Don't worry, I'll help you when the time comes. A wave of gratitude washed over him, then, and relief. Thank you. But what about the rest? What about Rhaegar being the third head of the dragon? It must be me, Daenerys, and Rhaegar united. Together, we're Ador Ahai the prince that was promised. Or whoever it is we're meant to be to kill the Great Other. Is that why Rhaegar sent me here? As for Rosier, I cannot speak for the fire god's intentions, the Raven replied, already walking away from him. But do as you must, Jon. You have good instincts. In the mean, I will await you on the banks of the Trident. With that, the three-eyed Raven was gone, swallowed by the night and disgorged into the ether in which he lived. Jon blinked after him, more conflicted and torn than ever. The following morning came all too quickly for him. He couldn't face breaking his fast and instead harnessed his horse for the ride back to port. While he was there, in the stables, Lyanna came to say goodbye. She looked lovely in a flowing white gown that had been let out to accommodate her swelling stomach. Her hair was loose about her shoulders and her dark gray eyes shining. I'm never going to see you again, am I? She asked. Jon felt like he'd been kicked in the gut. We cannot say for sure. She held him close, stifling a sniff as she ran a hand through his hair. Sometimes I think this is some drawn-out fever dream, and it's all been in my imagination. That I'll wake up in Winterfell, and I'll just be a maid again. But the longer this goes on, the more convinced I am you're real. Me too, he tried to laugh, but his voice broke. It sounded like the choking sob he was trying to disguise. If I'm wrong about many things and I'm actually still around once all this is over, the first thing I'll do is come back for you. Lyanna raised a pained smile. Then, my son, I hope you're wrong about everything. Mother, he replied. After that, he found he could say no more.